春雨之夜，作者王统照，飞鸽制作飞鸽文学。雪后，北京附近有个村庄，离铁道不远。12月某日下了一天的雪，到下午才止住。第二天天色虽还没明，全镇的房舍。
Spring Rain Night Author Wang Tongzhao Flying Pigeon Production at Flying Pigeon Literature. After the snow. There is a village near Beijing, not far from the railway. It snowed all day on a certain day in December, and it stopped in the afternoon. Although it was still dark the next day, all the houses in the town were still there.
树木在白色积雪中映着，破晓的时候格外清显。晨鸡喔喔地啼了几声，接连着引起了镇里的犬吠。正在这时，村庄的前面忽然起了一个沉重响亮的声音，接着就是枪声。
The trees, reflected in the white snow, are particularly clear at dawn. The rooster crowed a few times in the morning, which in turn caused the dogs in the town to bark. At this moment, a heavy and loud sound suddenly sounded in front of the village, followed by gunshots and
马蹄溅在雪上的声，呼喊的声，还夹杂着一些细小声响。这等声响约停了20分钟，又复大作起来。立时引起了村中最东一家人家的一个小孩子在破絮被里站立的感觉。
The sound of horse hooves trampling on the snow and the sound of shouting were also mixed with some small sounds. The noise stopped for about 20 minutes and then started louder again. It immediately caused a child in the easternmost family in the village to tremble in his ragged quilt.
破茅屋中被雪光映着，靠北墙一张床上躺着一个30多岁的女人，身旁有个5、6岁的男孩子。他们盖着薄薄絮被，冷风从沉黑的窗中穿进，使他们几乎不敢露出头来。
In the dilapidated hut, reflected by the snowy light, a woman in her 30s was lying on a bed against the north wall, with a boy of 5 or 6 years old beside her. They were covered with thin quilts, and the cold wind penetrated through the dark windows, making them almost afraid to show their heads.
重大可惊的声响从冷冽空气里传到他们的耳膜来。那个妇人也早已醒了，然而她的心正悬在辽远的地方和不可思议的事上去，没说话。小孩子正盼着天明，好继续游戏。
A huge and startling sound came from the cold air to their eardrums. The woman had also woken up a long time ago, but her heart was hanging on the distant place and the unimaginable things, and she didn't speak. The children were looking forward to dawn so they could continue their games.
他也不怕冷，时时爬起来，瞧瞧窗户，只见很白亮的，却也不知天明没有。看看母亲，正睡得熟，不过看她的头发时时有些松动， 又听着从他喉里发出一种清细像是哭的微声来。
He was not afraid of the cold either. He would get up from time to time and look at the window. He saw very bright white light, but he didn't know if it was dawn yet. Look at my mother, she is sleeping soundly, but her hair is a little loose from time to time, and I can hear a soft sound like crying coming from her throat.
和平日抱着他，在他膝上看一封信时发出来的声息一样。他是个聪明胆大的孩子，在这深夜破晓时，他这种联想在他幼稚的心中同电光闪动的一般快。即时
It was the same sound she made when she held him on her lap and read a letter. He was a smart and bold child, and at dawn this late night, his association flashed as fast as lightning in his childish heart. Immediate.
他又起来望望窗上的白色，他忽有不敢确定的思想：这白色的雪吗？雪是白的，怎么又化成污泥在河沟里流着？他这种推理是片段的，然而他幼稚的心中有这一念。
He got up again and looked at the white on the window. He suddenly had an uncertain thought. Is this white snow? Snow is white, so why does it turn into mud and flow in the ditch? His reasoning was fragmentary, but he had this thought in his childish heart.
却陡然觉得皮肤上也有些冷意。这时村前的响声正砰砰拍拍大作起来，他不知怎的一回事，但是觉得耳朵里几乎装不下了。他虽没听过这种声响，又不知是什么声响。
But suddenly I felt a little cold on my skin. At this time, there was a loud banging sound in front of the village. He didn't know what was going on, but he felt that it could hardly fit in his ears. Although he had never heard such a sound and did not know what it was.
因为他自下生以后所听见的鸡鸣声、鸽鼓声、春鸟的歌声、田圃里的菊篙放水声、母亲拍着他睡唱儿歌的声，这些声都是他很注意的，再大一点儿可怕的声响。
Because since he was born, he has heard the crow of cocks, the sound of winnowing grain, the singing of spring birds, the sound of orange trees releasing water in the field, and the sound of his mother patting him as he sleeps and singing nursery rhymes. These sounds are all that he pays great attention to. A louder and more terrible sound.
就是村中的群狗互相打架的声了。至于这雪后的早上忽有这种狂轰的大声响，他一向没曾听过。因为他小的时候，村中也有这种声响，不过他不记得。
It was the sound of dogs fighting with each other in the village. As for the sudden loud roaring sound this morning after the snow, he had never heard it before. Because when he was a child, there was this kind of sound in the village, but he didn't remember it.
他小而动魄的手 也有些颤动，似乎觉得窗格一动一动的也将倒下来了。他于是带着被子滚到母亲怀里道：“什么？什么？我的耳朵！”他母亲用枯瘦的手腕将他搂住道。
His small, frostbitten hands were trembling a little, as if he felt that the window partition was about to fall down with every movement. So he took the quilt, rolled into his mother's arms and said, "What? What?" "My ears." His mother hugged him with her skinny wrists and said,
不要怕，这是军队打野操的声响。什么军队？他很疑惑地这样问。军队是肩着枪刀打仗的，就和李文子拿的那个用纸糊的枪一样吗？他说是他父亲给他买的。
"Don't be afraid. This is the sound of the army doing field exercises." "What army?" he asked in confusion. "The army fights with guns and knives on its shoulders." "Is it the same as the gun made of paper that Li Wenzi held?" "He said his father bought it for him."
他却没及时回答他。这时窗外的炮声又作，他便含糊着道：“不，不。”他便不再问了，害怕的心也减去了一些。但是在他母亲怀里，很注意地听那忽轻忽骤断续的声响。
She did not answer him immediately. At this time, the sound of gunfire outside the window started again, and she said vaguely, "No, no." He stopped asking, and his fear was reduced. But in his mother's arms he listened carefully to the sudden and intermittent sounds.
他一手搂着这个可怜的孩子，一手把披下来的乱发慢慢拢上额角。室中已甚明亮，然而却觉得越发沉静。风声吹着落在地上的雪花，沙沙地打在纸窗上响。半晌
She hugged the poor child with one hand, and slowly gathered the messy hair up to her forehead with the other hand. The room was already very bright, but it felt more and more quiet. The wind blew the snowflakes falling on the ground and rustled on the paper windows. For a long time.
那孩子忽然问道：“母亲，我父亲，你说也有枪，他现在哪里？也在黑夜里做这种事吗？”他听他这句幼小而痴想的话，却没得什么说，只是从眼角里流下了一颗泪珠。
The child suddenly asked, "Mom, my father, you said he also has a gun. Where is he now? Does he also do this kind of thing in the dark?" She listened to his childish and wishful words, but he didn't say anything. He just shed a tear from the corner of his eye.
滴在孩子的短发上。天明了，村前的声响也停止了。冬晨的空气非常清冷，似乎也从长眠中醒悟过来一般，而村中的人都拿着早上的事做谈料。村前雪后的一片田野里
Drops on the child's short hair. It's dawn, and the sound in front of the village has stopped. The air in the winter morning was very cold, as if he had awakened from a long sleep, and everyone in the village was talking about what happened this morning. In front of the village, in a field after snow.
白茫茫的雪光，有许多凌乱杂沓、泥土交融的痕迹。田野旁一条小河也全结了冰，惨淡的日光映在冰上，也不见得有些融化。北风起冷，吹着树枝上的雪堕落在河冰上。
In the vast white snow, there are many traces of mess and mixed soil. A small river next to the field was also completely frozen. The pale sunlight reflects on the ice, and it doesn't necessarily melt at all. The north wind was extremely cold, blowing the snow on the branches and falling onto the river ice.
发出轻轻的声响。一望无际的雪，地上不见有一个行人，独有在背中惊怕的孩子。这时他却不怕冷，远远地领了4、5个小伙伴，冒着夜人的寒风，从阵中跑出。
Make a light and clear sound. There was endless snow, and there was not a single pedestrian on the ground. The only child who was frightened by the quilt was not afraid of the cold at this time. He led 4 or 5 friends from a distance and ran out of the town in the biting cold wind.
他在这4、5个同伴里是较小一些，然而还有比他小的一个女孩子，戴着一顶绿绒花睫帽，也在后边跟着他跑。他像首领似的，要表示他的功绩，脸上虽是冻得发了紫。
He was the smaller among the 4 or 5 companions, but there was a girl younger than him, wearing a green velvet rosette hat, who was also running behind him. Like a leader, he wanted to show off his achievements. Although his face was purple from the cold.
他却是一边跑着，一边鼓起勇气，和他那些小同伴断断续续地说道：“宝云和妞姐儿，你们看看我昨儿用雪盖的小楼啊，我和吴妹妹盖的，就在河边上，就在河边上。”
But while he was running, he mustered up his courage and said intermittently to his companions, Bao Yun and Sister Niu, "Look at the small building I built with snow yesterday. Sister Wu and I built it. Right on the river, right on the river."
管许你们一瞧就乐了。走，走，看小楼去。他不等说完，就跑到河边，那些小孩子也叽叽呱呱地随在他身后乱说。河岸很平正，昨夜的风虽冷冽，可也不大。他与他的吴妹妹
I hope you will be happy just to see it. Walk. Walk. Go and look at the small building. He ran to the river without waiting to finish, and the children followed him with their chirps and croaks. The river bank was very flat, and although the wind last night was cold, it was not too strong. He and his sister Wu.
费了一下晚功夫盖成的一座小楼，两边用雪块堆好，明明在河岸上。他们因那游戏的工作，连小手都冻破了。他自己昨晚回家，同母亲说了半天，恨不能即刻天亮。
After spending a whole night's work, I built a small building with snow blocks on both sides, clearly on the river bank. Their little hands were frozen due to the work of that game. He himself went home last night and talked to his mother for a long time, wishing that it would be dawn soon.
好去领那些小伙伴，夸是他们特殊的本事。所以早上在母亲怀中，虽听了奇怪的声响和看见母亲的泪痕，但他不知是什么事，也早忘了。
So that I can lead those friends and show off their special abilities. So in the morning in his mother's arms, although he heard strange noises and saw his mother's tears, he didn't know what it was and had long forgotten it.
这回只是急急去找他那在雪后的小建筑物，可是河水仍然全冻着，树枝垛雪仍然时时掉在冰上，一望无际的田野里仍然是白光幻耀，但他沿着河岸跑来跑去。
This time I was just rushing to find his small building behind the snow. However, the river was still completely frozen. Snowy tree branches still fell on the ice from time to time, and the endless fields were still shimmering with white light, but he ran back and forth along the river bank.
就是没有了他与他的吴妹妹昨晚很辛苦用雪堆成的小楼。河岸上只有纵横的马蹄和无数皮靴的痕迹，就是昨天晚上很平的雪地上也忽地扫去一道，堆起一片。
Just without the small building that he and his sister Wu worked hard to build out of snow last night. There are only traces of crisscrossing horse hooves and countless leather boots on the river bank. Even on the flat snow last night, a trace was suddenly swept away and piled up.
完全不是昨天那个样子。他急得乱说也说不清楚，别的孩子也看得呆了。那个戴绿绒花睫毛的小姑娘却眼包着幼稚而可怜的泪痕道：“乔烈，没有了，谁给我们毁坏了？”
Nothing like yesterday. He was so anxious that he couldn't explain clearly, and the other children were also stunned. The little girl wearing a green velvet rosette hat said with childish and pitiful tears, "Look. It's gone. Who destroyed it for us?"
你们瞧我的手链。他伸出小手来给这些孩子看，白而嫩的皮肤上已红了几块，且肿的裂破了。他这次失败，便给他娇嫩的童心里添了层重大的打击。
Look at my hands. She stretched out her little hand to show these children. There were a few red patches on her white and tender skin, and it was swollen and cracked. His failure this time was a huge blow to his delicate childish heart.
仿佛比这成年人的失恋还厉害。他说不出的难过。别的孩子虽也不说什么，只是愣愣地向他看。他觉得他们眼光中所含的意思是以他狂骗他们，不禁叫道：变了，变了。
It seems to be worse than an adult's broken love. He was indescribably sad. Although the other children didn't say anything, they just looked at him blankly. He felt that the meaning in their eyes was that they suspected him of deceiving them, so he couldn't help shouting, "It has changed, it has changed."
什么都变了，地也高了，低了。这是些什么怪物的脚迹，可将白雪弄脏了。变了，我那用雪盖的小楼也被怪物吃去了。有个很瘦弱的男孩子道：变，变。
Everything has changed. The ground is also higher, lower. What kind of monsters' footprints are these? Can they stain the white snow? Changed. My small building covered with snow was also eaten by monsters. A very thin boy said, "Change, change."
你们没听见今儿早上那些声响？我吓死了！怪物的声，把你的东西吃去了。你看这雪地上不是变了吗？这个孩子仿佛觉得自己所见高出于他们以上。
Didn't you hear those noises this morning? I was scared to death. The sound of monsters. Eat your food. Do you see the changes in the snow? The child seemed to feel that what he saw was above them.
然而说到这里，也有些气促色变。他和同来的小伙伴都有些惊惶害怕的样子。看看河水，地上的痕迹，都不说一句话，静悄悄地从雪道上回村里去。而那位小姑娘
However, when he said this, he became a little short of breath and became discolored. He and his friends who came with him looked a little frightened. Looking at the river water and the traces on the ground, he quietly walked back to the village from the snow path without saying a word. And that little girl.
一会看看自己的小手，口里还咕哝着道：“我的呢？谁毁坏了？”他跟在一群小孩子后面，时时回头，从包着泪的眼光中望望河岸的残雪。他头上的花结也被风吹着，飘飘的微动。
After a while, she looked at her little hands and muttered, "Where's mine? Who destroyed it?" She followed a group of children and looked back from time to time, looking at the river bank through her tear-filled eyes. Can snow. The flower knot on her head was also fluttering slightly in the wind.
1920年11月，沉思。韩淑云坐在他的画室里，正向西面宽大的玻璃窗子深沉地凝望。他有32、3岁的年纪，是个壮年的画家。他住在这间屋子里。
November 1920. Thoughts. Han Shuyun is sitting in his studio, staring deeply at the large glass window to the west. He is 32 or 13 years old and a painter in his prime. He lives in this house.
在最近3-4年所出的作品，有几种很博得社会上良好的批评，但他总不以自己的艺术品能满足他的天才的发挥，所以在最近期中
Several of the works he published in the last 3 or 4 years have won good criticism from the society, but he has never been able to satisfy his genius with his own works of art. Therefore, in the latest period,
想画一幅极有艺术价值而可表现人生真美的绘画，送到绘画展览会，想博得一个最大的荣誉。他想，他已经应允来做我这绘画的模型，裸体的模型，这是再好不过的事。
I want to paint a painting that has great artistic value and can express the true beauty of life. I want to send it to a painting exhibition to win the greatest honor. He thought, she has agreed to be the model for my painting, the nude model. This is the best thing.
在现代的女子中，她虽是女优，却有这种精神，情愿将她的机体一一呈录到我的笔尖上，以我的画才表现出来。这才是真正的曲线美丽。哦，这是我一生最得意的艺术表现。
Among modern women, although she is a heroine, she has this kind of spirit and is willing to expose her body to the tip of my pen one by one and express it through my paintings. This is the true beauty of curves. Oh, this is the most proud artistic expression of my life.
她美丽而温和，即使能把她那一对大而黑的眼睛画出，也足使我们绘画界的作家都搁笔了。她做这种想法非常愉快，是贞洁的愉快，是艺术家艺术冲动的愉快。
She is beautiful and gentle, and even if we could draw her big, black eyes, it would be enough to make writers in our field of painting stop writing. He was very happy to think like this. It was a pure pleasure, and it was the pleasure of the artist's artistic impulse.
这时正当春暮，他穿了一身灰色的呢洋服，加一朵紫色菱花的领结，衬着雪白领子。他满脸上现出了无限欣喜的情绪。
It was late spring at this time, and he was wearing a gray woolen suit, a bow tie with a purple damask flower, and a snow-white collar. His face showed infinite joy.
窗外的日影已经慢慢地移过了对面一所花园中的楼顶，金色间着红彩的落日余光，反射着天上一群白度轻逸的鸽子，一闪一闪的光线耀人眼光。这群鸽子飞翔空中。
The shadow of the sun outside the window has slowly moved over the roof of a building in the garden opposite. The golden and iridescent sunset light reflects a group of white-bellied and green-winged pigeons in the sky. The flashes of light are dazzling. These pigeons fly in the sky.
鸣叫的声音也同发挥自然的美慧一样。画室里充满了和静、深沉而安定的空气。韩淑云聚在一张新式的斜面画案上。
The sound of chirping is also the same as the use of nature's benefits. The studio is filled with peace, deep and stable air. Han Shuyun rested on a new-style inclined plane table.
很精细的一笔一笔在描他对面的那个裸体美人的轮廓。他把前天那种喜乐都收藏在心里，这时拿出他全副的艺术天才，对于这个活动的裸体模型做周到细密的观察。
He traced the outline of the naked beauty opposite him very carefully. He had kept the joy of the day before yesterday in his heart, and now used all his artistic talents to make a thoughtful and detailed observation of the moving nude model.
琼义女士斜坐在西窗下一个垫了绣服的沙发上，右手托住沙发的靠背，抚着自己的额角。一头柔润细腻的头发自然蓬松着，不十分齐整。她那白润中显出微红的皮肤色素。
Miss Cheong-yi was sitting on a sofa cushioned with embroidery under the west window, holding the backrest of the sofa with her right hand and stroking her forehead. Her soft and delicate hair is naturally fluffy and not very neat. Her white and moist skin shows reddish pigment.
和那双一见能感人极深的眼睛与耳轮的外扩扮演在发中，都表现出难以形容的美丽。腰间斜托着极明极薄的茜色轻纱，半堆在沙发上，半拖在地上的绒毯上面。
The pair of eyes that are deeply touching at first sight, and the outline of the helix of the ear, half hidden in the hair, all show indescribable beauty. A very bright and thin camisole gauze was hung diagonally around her waist, half piled on the sofa and half dragged on the carpet on the floor.
在那如波纹的细纱中，浮显出昨浴室的身体与纱的颜色相应。下面赤着双足，却非常平整洁净，与云母石刻成的一样。他的态度自然安闲，更显出他不深思而深思的表情来。
In the rippled fine yarn, a jade-like body emerges, matching the color of the yarn. The feet below are bare, but they are very smooth and clean, just like those carved from mica stone. Her attitude was natural and relaxed, and her expression showed that she was not thinking deeply but thinking deeply.
玻璃窗子虽被螺纹的白幕遮住，而静淡的日光线射到他的肉体上，越发有一种令人生出十分肃静的光景。这时两个人都没一点声音，满室里充满了艺术的意味。
Although the glass window was covered by a ribbed white curtain, the pure sunlight hitting her body gave her an even more solemn scene. At this time, neither of them made a sound, and the room was filled with artistic meaning.
与自然幽静的香味，是挤上一瓶芍药花香和他的肉体上发散的香味。这位画家的灵魂沉浸在这香味里了。2点半钟已过，忽有一种声浪从窗外传来。
A quiet and natural fragrance, the fragrance of a bottle of peony flowers on the table and the fragrance of her body. The painter's soul is immersed in this fragrance. It was past 2:30, and suddenly there was a sound coming from the window.
韩淑云向来不许有别人的声音打扰他的作画，现在正画得出神，正在画意上用功夫，竭力想发挥他的艺术天才，对着这个人参美，心中却也砰砰的乱跃。
Han Shuyan never allowed other people's voices to disturb his painting. Now he was absorbed in painting, working hard on the meaning of the painting, trying his best to display his artistic genius, but his heart was pounding wildly in front of this beautiful person.
他一笔一笔地画下去，他的思想也一起一落，不知如何，总是不能安静。不意这叩门的声浪忽来惊破他的思潮，且是一连几次的门铃扯得非常的响。他怒极了，再也不能画了。
He continued to draw stroke by stroke, and his thoughts also fell together. He didn't know why, but he couldn't calm down. Unexpectedly, the sound of knocking on the door suddenly broke his thoughts. Moreover, the doorbell rang very loudly several times in a row. He was so angry. I can no longer draw.
丢下笔，跑出画室，走到门口的时候，无意中回头来看看琼义，他仍是手抚着额角，一毫不动，而洁白手腕上的皮肤里的青脉管显得非常清楚。大门开了。
Dropped the pen and ran out of the studio. When he walked to the door, he accidentally looked back at Xiong-yi. She was still stroking her forehead with her hand, not moving at all. The green veins in the skin of her white wrist were very clear. The door is open.
他一看来的人像是个新闻记者，又像是个教书的青年，戴一顶讲究的薄绒帽，这却拿在手里扇风。天气并不很暖，他头上偏有几个汗珠。
At first glance, he looked like a news reporter or a young teacher. He was wearing a fancy thin velvet hat, but he was holding it in his hand to fan himself. The weather was not very warm, and there were a few beads of sweat on his head.
他的脸色在苍白色中现出原是活泼秀美的神情。这时见门开了，不等韩淑云说一句话，便踏进门来道：“密斯托韩，是你吗？”韩淑云也摸不清头脑，本来一团怒气。
His face showed a lively and beautiful expression in the pale color. Seeing the door open at this time, without waiting for Han Shuyun to say a word, he stepped in and said, "Miss Han, is that you?" Han Shuyun couldn't figure it out, and he was originally angry.
更加上些疑惑，匆忙礼道：“是啊，我是，但好，画室在哪里？”“哼，大画室。”话还没说完，便要往里跑。舒云截上一步道：“少年，你是谁？为什么这样？”“我呀，是日日新闻的记者。”
He became even more confused and said hurriedly, "Yes, I am, but, okay, where is the studio? Humph, a great painter." Before he could finish speaking, he was about to run inside. Shu Yun took a step forward and said, "Young man, who are you? Why are you like this?" "I am a reporter from Daily News."
琼义女士在这里吗？她说时用精锐的眼光注视着舒云。舒云明白了他是什么人，更不由非常生气，把住少年的臂膀，想拉着他出去。正在这时，琼义女士披着茜纱的长佩。
"Miss Chilney, are you here?" When he said this, he looked at Shu Yun with sharp eyes. Shu Yun understood who he was, and couldn't help but get very angry. He grabbed the young man's arm and wanted to pull him out. At this moment, Miss Chilney put on her clothes, a long robe with a veil.
把画室的西窗开放，叫出惊促的声音道：“我以为是谁，还是你，你呀！请密斯托汗让他到屋里坐吧。”舒云抱了一腔子怒气，方要向着这个少年发泄。
Opening the west window of the studio, he called out in a startled voice, "Who did I think was you, you? Please ask Mistahan to let him sit in the room." Shu Yun was full of anger. Fong wanted to vent to this young man.
不料琼义却从窗里说出这个话，竟要将他让到自己的画室里去。他简直手指都发抖了。那个少年更不管他，便闯进了画室。舒云也脸红气促，跟了进来。琼义满脸欣喜。
Unexpectedly, Cheong-yi said this from the window and asked him to go to his studio. His fingers were literally shaking. The young man ignored him and broke into the studio. Shu Yun was also blushing and short of breath, and followed in. Cheong-yi's face was full of joy.
披着茜纱长佩，两只润丽的眼睛含了无限的乐意。待到青年进来后，使用双手握住了他的两臂。但青年看看屋里的话剧和他这种披着轻纱的裸体，觉得他所听的话。
Wearing a long silk veil, her two moist eyes are full of infinite joy. When the young man came in, he held his arms with both hands. But when the young man looked at the painting equipment in the room and her naked body covered with gauze, he felt that what he heard was.
是没什么疑惑了。他脸上也发了一阵微红，即刻变成愠怒的样子，一句话也不说，只是反抓住他的手向舒云看。舒云此时心里的艺术性已经消失无余了。
There is no doubt any more. His face also turned red for a while, and immediately turned into a depressed look. Without saying a word, he just grabbed her hand and looked at Xu Yun. At this time, Xu Yun's artistry had completely disappeared.
从心灵中冒出热情的火焰来，面上火也似的热，觉得有些把持不定，恨不得将青年及时打死。自己也知道这话不能说出，便用力地坐在一把软椅上，用力过猛，即将弹簧作线。
A fire of passion burst out from his heart, and his face was as hot as fire. He felt a little unsure and wanted to beat the young man to death immediately. I also knew that I couldn't say these words, so I sat down on a soft chair with so much force that the springs almost collapsed.
琼一握住青年的手，觉得其冷如冰，也很奇怪。青年对他除了极冷冷的不自然的微笑外，更不说别的话。把乍叩门时那种怒气又消失了，变成一种忧郁懊丧的面色。
Xiong Yi held the young man's hand and felt that it was as cold as ice, which was also strange. The young man said nothing to her except a very cold and unnatural smile. The anger he felt when he first knocked on the door disappeared again, turning into a melancholy and frustrated expression.
他后来几乎落下泪来，不多时穿好衣服，也不顾何淑云辞别，并着青年的肩膀走了出去。淑云不能说一句话，眼睁睁望着他的影子随了青年走去。白色丝裙的摆纹摇动。
She was almost in tears later. After a while, he put on his clothes, ignored Xu Yun and said goodbye, and walked out holding the young man's shoulder. Xu Yun couldn't say a word, just stared at her shadow and followed the young man. The waves of the white silk skirt swayed.
也似乎嘲笑他的失意一般。看他对待青年那种亲密态度，恨不能立刻便同他决斗。不知怎地，他原来的艺术性完全消失了。他忘了他来做裸体模型的终点是过了。
It also seemed to laugh at his frustration. Seeing her intimate attitude towards the young man, she wished she could fight him immediately. Somehow, his original artistry was completely gone. He forgot that it was past the hour for her to pose as a nude model.
他似是仍然看见他的充实、美满，如云石琢成的身子还斜栖在那个沙发上。他恨极了，身上都觉得颤动，勉强立起身来，走到沙发边，却有一种芬香恬静的气味。
He seemed to still see her full, perfect, and marble-cut body still leaning on the sofa. He hated it so much that his whole body felt trembling. He reluctantly stood up and walked to the sofa, but there was a fragrant and sweet smell.
触到了他的嗅觉， 他同青年出了韩画室的大门，他满心里不知怎样难过，不是靠近青年便站不住了。但青年却板起冷酷苍白的面目对他，有时向他脸上用力看一看。
It touched his sense of smell. She and the young man walked out of Painter Han's door. She felt so sad that she couldn't stand if she didn't get close to the young man. But the young man turned to her with a cold and pale face, and sometimes looked hard at her face.
两个人都不言语，转过了两条街角，忽听得滋滋的声响，一辆华丽摩托车从对面疾驰过来，车上就只有一个司机，却是穿着礼服，戴着徽章，高高的礼帽压住浓厚的眉心。
Neither of them spoke. After turning 2 corners, I suddenly heard a squeaking sound as a gorgeous motorcycle sped over from the opposite side. There was only one driver in the car, but he was wearing a formal dress, a badge, and a tall hat covering his thick eyebrows.
晕了满脸的怒气，是个50多岁的官吏。看他那个样子，似乎方从哪里宴会来的。但是当他的摩托车走的时候，琼毅的眼光非常尖利，从沙土飞扬中看见车上这个人。
His face was full of anger. He is an official in his 50s. Looking at him, it seemed that Fong came from a party somewhere. But when his motorcycle was driving away, Cheong Yi's eyes were very sharp and he saw the man on the car through the flying sand.
不禁吃了一惊，而且这辆车去的路线正是他们从韩淑云家来的路线。这时被种种感觉渗到心头上，自己疑惑起来，不知为什么一天之中遇了这些奇怪的事情。不多时
I couldn't help but be surprised. And the route this car took was exactly the route they took from Han Shuyun's house. At this time, various feelings seeped into my heart, and I began to wonder why I encountered these strange things throughout the day. Not long after,
这辆车已经停在韩画师的门首了。这个50多岁的人穿了时髦华贵的大礼服，挺起胸脯，手里提着一根分量重的手杖，用力向着修漆的极精致的门上乱敲。他忘了扯门铃。
the car has been parked in front of Painter Han's door. This man in his 50s was wearing a fashionable and luxurious dress, with his chest puffed out, holding a heavy cane in his hand, and knocking hard on the exquisitely painted door. He forgot to ring the doorbell.
相隔不到1点钟的功夫，韩淑云这个门首受了这2次敲声。这种声音只把画室的心潮激乱了，一层层的怒涛冲荡，也把他的心打碎，变成狂人了。
Less than 1 o'clock apart, Han Shuyun, the head of the door, received these 2 knocks. This kind of sound stirred up the painter's heart. The waves of rage broke his heart and turned him into a madman.
50多岁的官吏和韩淑云对立在门首，因为他再不能让人到他室中去。这位官吏拿出一副娇贵傲慢的眼光，注定淑云似怒似狂的面孔。
An official in his 50s faced Han Shuyun at the head of the door, because he could no longer let people into his room. The official showed a proud and arrogant look that doomed Shuyun's angry and crazy face.
他从狡猾的眼角里露出12分瞧不起这位画师的态度。淑云对这个来人更加愤怒，两个人没说了2句话，就个人喊出难听而暴力的声音。淑云两手用力叉着腰道：“恶徒！”
From the corners of his cunning eyes, he showed his contempt for the painter. Shu Yun was even more angry at this visitor. The two people didn't say a few words before each shouted an unpleasant and violent voice. Shu Yun put his hands on his hips and said, "Evil villain."
万恶的官吏，你有权利吗？哼，来占脏了我的门口，呵呵，简直是个流氓，是个高等骗人的流氓。你骗了社会上多少金钱，许还不算。
Evil officials. Do you have power? Humph, come and dirty my door. Hee hee. He is simply a hooligan, a high-level deceitful hooligan. It doesn't count how much money and false reputation you have defrauded the society.
又要借着画什么裸体不裸体的画来骗那个女子。我和你说，这时这个官吏眼睛已经邪棱了，说到末后一个字，现出极坚决的态度。什么？骗人的人？
And he wanted to deceive that woman by painting some nude or not. Let me tell you, at this time, the official's eyes were already squinting, and when he said the last word, he showed a very determined attitude. What? Liar.
往后不准你再引他入你的画室，哼！你敢不照我的话办理，你听见吗？他是我的。狡猾的官吏话还没完，陡觉得脸上一响，眼前便发了一阵黑。原来韩淑云这时
You are not allowed to bring her into your studio again from now on. Humph. You dare not do what I say, do you hear me? She is mine. Before the cunning official finished speaking, he suddenly felt a sound on his face, and his eyes went dark for a while. It turned out that Han Shuyun at this time.
他那一向温和幽静的艺术性质完全消失，直视成了狂人。听了这个官吏的话，再也忍不住，便抓住他的衣领，给他脸上打了沉重有力的一掌。
His usually gentle and quiet artistic nature completely disappeared, and he became a madman. After hearing what the official said, he couldn't bear it anymore, so he grabbed his collar and gave him a heavy and powerful slap on the face.
于是两个人便在门首石阶上抓扭起来，手杖丢了，折断了，不知谁的金纽扣用脚踏坏了，个人很整齐光洁的头发纷乱了，韩淑云的紫菱花领结也撕破了。他们
So the two of them started to fight on the stone steps at the door. The cane was lost and broken. Someone's golden button was broken with his foot. Everyone's neat and smooth hair was messed up. Han Shuyun's purple silk flower bow tie, also torn. Them.
官吏和画家的庄严安闲的态度全没有了，他们是被心中的迷惘的狂热燃烧着全身了。春末的晚风已无些冷意，只携着了一些花香气味，阵阵地吹到湖中的绿波上。
The solemn and leisurely attitude of officials and painters was completely gone. Their whole bodies were burned by the delusional fervor in their hearts. The evening breeze in late spring is no longer chilly, but carries only the fragrance of flowers, blowing onto the green waves in the lake.
天气微阴，一片一片暗云遮住蔚蓝的天色，有时从云影里露出些霞光来，映在湖滨的柳叶子上，更发出一种鲜嫩的微光，反射到平静似的湖水上。风声微动。
The weather was slightly overcast, with dark clouds covering the blue sky, and sometimes some glow emerged from the cloud shadows. Reflected on the willow leaves on the lakeside, it emits a fresh and tender light, which is reflected on the flat mirror-like lake water. The wind blows slightly.
柳叶也随着沙沙作响，渐渐的四围罩了些暖雾，似有无穷的细小白点，与往木板上印的细点一样，将一片大地弥漫起来。这个城外的湖滨是风景最盛的地方。
The willow leaves also rustled. Gradually, some warm mist enveloped the surroundings, and there seemed to be endless tiny white dots, just like the fine dots printed on the mesh plate, covering the entire land. The lakeside outside the city is the most scenic place.
这时的一切风景笼在雾中，看不分明了。湖滨有个亭子，是预备游人吸足的所在。琼义一个人不知怎地，却独自跑到这个亭子上来。
At this time, all the scenery was shrouded in fog and could not be seen clearly. There is a pavilion by the lakeside, which is a place where tourists can rest. Xiong-yi somehow came to this pavilion alone.
他怎么不到韩淑云画室里做裸体模型了？不到戏院里去扮演了？在这春日的黄昏，一个人儿跑出城外，在暖屋木筑的亭子里独自沉思。他穿了雅淡的衣服。
Why doesn't she do nude modeling in Han Shuyun's studio? Aren't you going to perform in the theater? In this spring dusk, a man ran out of the city and meditated alone in a pavilion covered with warm mist. She wore elegant and light clothes.
脸上露出非常忧郁的面色。从前丰润的面貌已变成惨白，连眼圈也有些青涩。他把握着自己的手，像没点气力，只觉着周围的雾裂、水裂、风吹的柳叶生裂。
There was a very melancholy look on his face. The formerly plump face has turned pale, and even the eye circles are a little blue. She seemed to have no strength in her hand, and could only feel the mist, water, and the sound of willow leaves blowing in the wind around her.
和晚上归飞的乌鸦乱啼声都向他尽力地逼来，使他的心弦越发沉郁不扬。他在白雾的庭中看着蒙蒙不清的湖光，他一面想，他和我几年的相知，平常对我很肯挚，很亲爱的。
And the crows of crows returning home at night were all coming towards her with all their strength, making her heartstrings even more depressed. She was in the pavilion of white mist, looking at the misty lake light. She thought, he and I have known each other for several years, and he is usually very sincere and dear to me.
也没什么呀，我替人家做裸体画的模型，并不是可耻的事，铸成名家的艺术品，也没有别的关系啊。他知道的这样快，找到那里那样冷淡，看我像做了什么恶事。
It's nothing. It is not shameful for me to make models for other people's nude paintings, and it has nothing to do with helping to create works of art by famous artists. He knew it so quickly and was so cold when he found it. He looked at me as if I had done something evil.
从此便和我同陌生的人一般，这是什么意思啊？韩淑云却也奇怪得很，我的朋友找我，没有什么稀奇，怎么便和人家抢去了他的画稿一样的愤怒？
From now on, you are like a stranger to me. What does this mean? Han Shuyun was also very surprised. My friend came to see me. There was nothing strange about him. Why was he as angry as if someone had snatched his drawing?
我的灵魂却在我自己的身子里呀。他想到这里，看看四围的雾气越发重了，毫无声息。他不觉又继续想到那讨人嫌的狡猾官吏，听说后来和韩淑云还打了一场。
My soul is in my own body. When she thought of this, she saw that the fog around her was getting heavier and heavier, and there was no sound. She unconsciously continued to think, that annoying and cunning official, I heard that he had a fight with Han Shuyun later.
被巡警劝开了，他来缠我，我只是不见他，他反在社会上给我散布些恶迹的谣言。现在我最爱的人不来了，不再爱我了。画师成了狂人，不再做他的艺术生活了。奇怪。
The patrolman persuaded him to leave. He came to pester me, but I just didn't see him. Instead, he spread some evil rumors about me in society. Now the person I love most is no longer here and no longer loves me. The painter has become a madman and no longer lives his artistic life. Strangeness?
到底我有我的自由啊！世上的人怎么对于我这种人这么逼迫呢？他想到这里，他的心像浸在冷水里一样抖颤，四围静寂，白雾渐渐消失了。
After all, I have my freedom. Why are people in this world so persecuting people like me? When she thought of this, her heart trembled as if she were immersed in cold water. There was silence all around, and the white fog gradually disappeared.
从朦胧的云影里稍稍露出一丝的月光，射在沐着雾的湖水上。这阴黑的黄昏却和他心中的沉思一般，但在云雾中还射出的一丝光明，在他心头上只是闷沉沉的一片。
A sliver of moonlight peeked out from the hazy cloud shadows, shining on the foggy lake. This dark dusk was just like the meditation in her heart, but the ray of light that still shot out in the clouds and mist was just a dull feeling in her heart.
他沉思了多少时候，忽听得耳旁有一种偶偶的声音，方由梦中醒悟过来。一阵微风吹过，抬头借着月光看去，原来是只白鸥从身旁飞过，没入淡雾的湖中去了。
She had been meditating for a long time when she suddenly heard a sound of vomiting in her ears, and she woke up from her dream. A breeze blew by, and when I looked up in the moonlight, I saw a white gull flying past me and disappearing into the misty lake.
1920年12月，编痕，飞鸽制作按飞鸽文学。乡村中的9月是个由热闹渐渐到了荒凉的转机。田垄旁时而堆下些零落的榆叶与柳叶，深黄色和老绿色的叶形。
December 1920, Whip Marks. Flying Pigeon production at Flying Pigeon Literature. September in the countryside is a transition from liveliness to desolation. Sometimes scattered elm leaves and willow leaves are piled next to the field, with dark yellow and old green leaf shapes.
都沾上些干泥，在地上被风吹得旋转。人家的园圃里，晚期的扁豆尚在苇子扎成的架子上长着弯曲的蔓，有几个已经老了的豆荚在米黄的团形叶子底下。
They were all stained with some dry mud and were rotated by the wind on the ground. In other people's gardens, the early lentils are still on the shelves made of reeds, with curved vines growing. There are several old pods under the beige ball-shaped leaves.
枫树渐渐着了红的色彩，渲染在蔚蓝晴明的天与碧绿的溪流中，现出天然色彩的调和来。 冷冷的秋风吹动它们，与夕阳的金色光线相映着，越发美丽而炫耀。
The maple trees gradually turned red, rendering them in the clear blue sky and green streams, showing the harmony of natural colors. The cold autumn wind blows them, and against the golden light of the sunset, they become more beautiful and dazzling.
这个乡村的后面是连绵不断的小林腹，赭色的石径忽高忽下，老远的通向一条大道，是往木阿镇的大道。木阿镇是最近几百里的极繁华、极显要的地方，那里有医院、学校。
Behind this village is a continuous line of small mausoleums. The ochre-colored stone path rises and falls, leading to a road in the distance, which is the road to Mua town. Mua town is a very prosperous and dangerous place in the past few hundred miles. There are hospitals and schools there.
工厂、市场又靠近江口，时而有汽船载着客人货物到镇上去。而有足以震慑人们的是，在镇中有一所兵营，他们乡里人常常听说有几千人在里边住着呢。
There are factories and markets, and they are close to the river mouth. From time to time there are steamboats carrying guests and goods to the town. What is particularly shocking to people is that there is a military camp in the town. People in their hometown often hear that there are thousands of people living there.
所以这个乡村的出产品，什么食物链、谷米链都送到木阿镇上去售卖。但由乡村去需越过几重的山岭，难走得很。有的说是60里的路程，而需走1个整天才能到达。
Therefore, the products of this village, including food and rice, are all sent to Mua town for sale. But to go from the countryside, we have to cross many mountains and it is difficult to walk. Some say it is 60 miles away, and it takes a whole day to reach it.
秋天来了，而乡村中的人家却格外要忙碌起来，因为一面要将园圃和田野中的农产收拾好，一面又需计划冬日的储藏。什么该运到镇上去卖，而干的蔬菜。
Autumn is here, but families in the countryside are especially busy. Because on the one hand, the crops in the gardens and fields must be tidied up, and on the other hand, winter storage must be planned. What should be transported to town to sell, and dried vegetables.
和制作的冬日的农家食物，又需赶着制好，预备一到飞雪的冷天，好同乡邻们斟着佳酿的暖酒，在茅檐下同他们的父母妻儿好安心去偿还1年的劳苦。
And the winter farm food must be prepared in a hurry, so that when the cold weather comes with snow, we can drink home-brewed warm wine with our neighbors, and go with their parents, wives, and children under the thatched eaves in peace. Pay back a year's hard work.
所以这时他们正忙得很。广场子里都堆了些圆锥形的草堆子，田中有些农夫和妇女儿童还在那里割最后的稻子。每家用土筑成的墙外探出几只的柿子枝来。
So they were very busy at the moment. There are some conical haystacks piled up in the square, and some farmers, women and children are still there cutting the last rice in the fields. Outside the earthen walls of each house, a few persimmon branches poked out.
半红半青色的事实，惹得赤着脚的小孩子馋得流着咸汁乱跳。乡村的房屋很是利乱，绝没有整齐划一的形式。全村子中只有一所小小的2层楼。
The half-red and half-green persimmon fruits made the barefoot children jump and salivate with greed. The houses in the countryside are very chaotic and have absolutely no neat and uniform form. There is only one small 2-story house in the whole village.
这是村中第一个妇人刘家的住室，她怎么称得起第一个妇人？不过她的房子较为整齐些、多些，而她又是木洼镇上的学务委员之一。
This is the residence of the Liu family, the first rich man in the village. How could he be called the first rich man? However, his house is neater and more numerous, and he is one of the academic committee members of Mua Town.
兼任着他们3个村子联合办的小学校的校长，所以他的乡邻才这样的称呼他。不过所谓第一妇人中包含着伟大、敬仰、尊敬、羡慕的复杂意味，不只是说他的资产呢。
He is also the principal of the primary school jointly run by their 3 villages. That's why his neighbors called him that. However, the so-called richest man contains complex meanings of greatness, admiration, respect, and envy, not just his assets.
夕阳的余光尚在村前的溪流上乱荡着，一条条的霞色光线反映着那所小楼的玻璃，使人目眩。一个农妇正自捡了一筐的木梗和落叶，沿着溪岸走来。他那枯干的目光。
The afterglow of the setting sun is still lingering on the stream in front of the village, and the streaks of twilight light reflect the glass of the small building, making people dazzled. A peasant woman was walking along the stream bank with a basket of wooden stems and fallen leaves on her shoulders. Her withered eyes.
正对着10码外的楼窗出神，他懒懒地疲乏地走，忽听得溪的西岸有个轻响的铃声由树林中散出。铃声在乡村中是常听得到的，但那再重的皮驴。
He was lost in thought, facing the building window 10 yards away. She walked lazily and tiredly, and suddenly heard a clear ringing sound coming from the woods on the west bank of the stream. Ringtone is often heard in the countryside. But the tired donkey carrying a heavy load.
和耕地用的牛项上挂的大而生锈的铁铃发出音来，沉重粗涩，没有这等清朗。他发现了这个疑问，便立住了。一瞥眼功夫，见林中小径上跑出一个骑马的人来，马是棕色的。
The sound produced by the big and rusty iron bell hung on the neck of the oxen used for plowing is heavy and rough, not as clear as that. When she discovered this question, she stopped. At a glance, he saw a man on horseback running out of the forest path. The horse is brown.
骑马的人却穿了轻绒的短衣，戴顶阔边的黄色草帽，勒住马弦，很从容地向村中走来。他的感觉是迟钝的，村子中又少见这样的人，所以他注视着他，很为奇怪。正在这时，
The man on horseback wore a green velvet short coat and a wide-brimmed yellow straw hat. He reined in the horse's bit and walked towards the village calmly. Her senses were dull, and there were few such people in the village, so she looked at him, feeling very strange. At this moment,
他那村中小楼的主人从村西面拄着一把遮日的伞，左肘下夹了一大包的书籍，也夺过来。他是位40几岁的人，身体很是强壮。他少年时曾在非洲冒过几次的大险。
the owner of her small building in the village also walked over from the west side of the village holding an umbrella to protect her from the sun and holding a large bag of books under her left elbow. He is a man in his 40s and very strong. When he was a boy, he took several big risks in Africa.
著作了几部游记，很为人所欢迎。不过他回国以后，并没做什么事业，仍然是回到他的故家过平凡的日子。这时他方从公立小学校回家，正自盘算着一个教育的问题。
He has written several travel notes, which are very popular. However, after he returned to China, he did not have any career. He still returned to his hometown and lived an ordinary life. At this time, Fang Fang came home from the public elementary school and was thinking about an education issue.
低着头只管走。那个肩筐的妇人瞧见他来了，便不由得将惊诧的声音喊出。哪知这位校长先生没听见他喊出的是什么字，抬头一望。
Keep your head down and just walk. The woman carrying the basket couldn't help shouting in surprise when she saw him coming. Unexpectedly, the principal didn't hear the word she shouted. He looked up and said,
却正看见那个缓缓而来的骑马的青年。他的眼光是锐利的，虽隔着几十码，他已看得清清楚楚，便将手执的伞挥起来道：“木侠，是你呀！”对面的青年骑在马背上。
But he was seeing the young man on horseback coming slowly. His eyes were sharp. Even though he was dozens of yards away, he could see clearly. He waved the umbrella in his hand and said, "Monsieur, it's you." The young man opposite, on horseback.
心里被忧郁冲塞住了。他没有想到农夫向他注视，和那位校长先生和他打招呼。哦，听见了没，木匣匣？校长先生又高声这样说。他从马背上方醒了过来，他仿佛已看见。
My heart was filled with melancholy. He did not expect the peasant woman to look at him or the principal to greet him. "Oh, did you hear that, Monsieur, Sia?" Mr. Principal said this loudly again. When he woke up from his horse, he seemed to have seen.
便一纵马配，那匹小而壮健的棕马就跑了过来。及至到了近前，他手中一松，马便立住，口中喷出呼吸的热气来。他反身跳下来，姿势异常稳重，像是久经骑马的战士一样。
Then he turned the bridle, and the small but strong brown horse ran over. When he got close, his hand loosened, and the horse stood up, breathing hot air from its mouth. He jumped down with an unusually steady posture, like a warrior who had been riding a horse for a long time.
他英爽而忧虑的面上蒙了一层细尘，却掩不了双目锐利的光。他执着绿皮的马鞭，很诚恳地和校长先生握手。他道：“刘伯伯，我们有10年没有见啊。”他说出这几个字。
His handsome and worried face was covered with a layer of fine dust, but it could not hide the sharp light in his eyes. He held on to the green leather riding crop and shook hands with the principal sincerely. He said, "Uncle Lou, we haven't seen each other for 10 years." He said these words.
再也续不下去。他的眼光中为一种诚意的、切念的性感所激动，放出晶莹的光润来。他少停了一会，又继续说：“刘伯伯你怎么在这个村子里？”刘伯伯也被同样的感动。
It can't go on any longer. His eyes were moved by a sincere and thoughtful interest, and they radiated a crystal light. He paused for a while and then continued, "Uncle Lou, why are you in this village?" Uncle Lou was also moved in the same way.
他虽是极爱说话的人，到现在看见10年以前的小友，居然变成个风尘中的青年，不禁也急切说不出话来，只从他的嘴唇上蹦出几个“喂，是你哪儿来”的几个字。
Although he is a very talkative person, now that he sees that his little friend from 10 years ago has turned into a young man in the dust, he can't help but feel anxious and speechless. Only a few words burst out from his lips. "Hey, it's you. Where are you from?"
这时那个青年摘下帽子， 用马鞭打去了帽上的尘土，一面却望着刘伯伯诉他以前的身世。他说，那时不是一个冬天，离着杜新岁没几天了。刘伯伯不是送我同我子子。
At this time, the young man took off his hat and whipped the dust off the hat with a riding crop. At the same time, he looked at Uncle Lou and told him about his past life experience. He said, it was winter. It was just a few days before the new year. Uncle Lou didn't send me and my sister off.
母亲走的吗？可我那时只知看刘伯伯穿的洋服的惊奇，全不知我以后悲哀的幻影正在我眼前跳舞。可怜我父亲经营了一生的海外商业，竟得那样结果，都赖。
Mother, are you leaving? Cough. At that time, I only knew how surprised I was when I saw the foreign clothes that Uncle Lou was wearing. I had no idea that the phantom of my future sorrow was dancing in front of my eyes. It's a pity that my father's overseas business, which he has been running all his life, ended up like this, all because of
刘伯伯这些话，我是后来听我母亲说的。他话没说完，刘伯伯便拉过那匹马的缰绳，打断青年的话道：“你走得很疲乏了，你且到我家里休息几天，好慢慢告诉你那后来的事情。”
I heard these words of Uncle Lou later from my mother. Before he finished speaking, Uncle Lou pulled the reins of the horse and interrupted the young man. You are very tired from walking. Please come to my house to rest for a few days, so that I can slowly tell you what happened next.
就是你曼妹，她也喜欢你来，去听你说话。他一边说着，一边向楼角上指去。但是青年从感慨惊怒的表情中紧皱了眉痕，发出坚决的口吻，执着刘伯伯的手道：“
It's you, Man May. She also likes you to come and listen to you." As he spoke, he pointed to the corner of the building. But the young man frowned from the expression of admiration, and held Uncle Lou's hand firmly in a firm tone.
我不知道刘伯伯的信息有5、6年了，哪知还是仍还你的故乡，我只以为你又到什么外国去了。可不啊，我必须在这里住下几天，好在我是一个无家的人。他说着，眼圈发红。
I didn't know that Uncle Liu's information was 5 or 6 years old. Unexpectedly, you still returned to your hometown. I just thought you had gone to some foreign country again. Cough. No, I have to live here for a few days. Fortunately, I am a homeless person, he said with red eyes.
声音也变哑了，随即继续急促地说：“我愿意在刘伯伯家常住，可是此刻不能了。今夜10点钟以前必定要赶到木洼镇去， 因为我自去年已在军队中补到骑兵的下尉。
The voice also became hoarse. Then he continued to say hastily, I would like to stay at Uncle Lou's house, but I can't do it now. I must get to Mua town before 10 o'clock tonight, because I have recruited cavalry lieutenants in the army since last year.
原来是住在别一省里。这回因为有战事，刘伯伯是晓得的，要挑选一部分将校调到木阿镇的军队中去，预备第一次出发。我本来应该早来的，我因为将来的命运。
It turned out that I lived in another province. Because there is a war this time, Uncle Lou knows it and wants to select some of the colonels to be transferred to the army in Mua town to prepare for the first departure. I should have come earlier, because of my future destiny.
多芬要与死神结缘了，所以告假，回到我母亲的坟上看了看，又往我子家看了看他所遗留下的小孩子。所以今天一早方从地方下了汽车，今天晚上要赶到木阿镇去。
Dwafen is about to meet the god of death. So I took leave and went back to my mother's grave to look at it. Then I went to my sister's house to look at the children she had left behind. So this morning, Fong got off the car from place and had to rush to Mua town tonight.
不明天就乘轮船出发咧。他说是，看看自己的手表，很急促地道，恐怕没有什么耽搁了。刘伯伯凝住神听他说了这些话，不由得将手中的伞倒在地上，目光痴痴地望着青年。
We'll leave by ship tomorrow. As he spoke, he looked at his watch and said hurriedly, I'm afraid there won't be any delay. Uncle Lou listened intently and listened to what he said. He couldn't help but fall the umbrella in his hand to the ground. He looked at the young man with his eyes.
半晌方靠近一步道：“怎么？你母亲和子也死了吗？13年前，我母亲死在旅店里。去年我可怜的子也因难产，抛了2个小孩子去了。他这时已流出青年悲哀的泪痕来。”
After a while, Fong took a step closer and said, What? Are your mother and sister also dead? It was 3 years ago. My mother died in the hotel. Last year, my poor sister also gave birth to 2 children due to dystocia. The child is gone, He was already shedding the sad tears of a young man.
刘伯伯如做梦似的，他心中顿时织成了幻想的迷惘。他想他的老友死后这一重的悲幕，却都使他青年充了主角。他又想那时他穿身露膝的白绒洋服。
Uncle Lou was as if he were dreaming, and a web of fantasy suddenly became woven in his mind. He thought that the tragedy of his old friend's death had made him, the young man, the protagonist. He also thought that at that time he was wearing a white velvet dress that showed off his knees.
腮上如点着胭脂般的红润，他和我们离别的，和我的曼儿并住着时，我心中只是有着他们可爱的一对小生物，心中奏着欢慰的曲调。哪知后来因为本省一带起了乱世。
His cheeks were as rosy as rouge. When he parted from us and lived with my manor, I just had their lovely little creatures in my heart, playing a tune of comfort in my heart. Unexpectedly, later because of there has been chaos in this province.
便永远不知各家的去向。哦，他现在一个人了，孤独的青年，枪炮中的对官，他走了，不能住下吗？他这样想，竟没有和青年在说话的力量。青年却坚决地道：“刘伯伯不必这样。”
Then we will never know where each family is going. Oh. He is alone now. A lonely young man. The team officer among the guns, he's gone. Can't you stay here? Thinking like this, he didn't have the strength to talk to the young man anymore. The young man said resolutely, "Uncle Lou, you don't have to be like this."
我这一行也是抱了决心的。青春的背影已将我逐到失望和悲哀的海中去，我的心已不知早碎成了几多片片。我早决定了，人生究竟有归宿呀，青年的热血。
In my profession, I am also determined. The shadow of youth has driven me into the sea of disappointment and sorrow. My heart has been broken into so many pieces. I have already decided. Life has a destination after all. The passion of youth.
究竟有个蹦剧与流放的时候，我至今还有什么希望呢？况且，这是不能再为延缓的。大约呀，再见，刘伯伯。10年以后，也会成了梦影罢。我走了，已经耽误了20分钟，到晚了。
There will be a time of gathering and exile. What hope do I have now? Besides, this can no longer be postponed, probably. Goodbye, Uncle Lou. 10 years later, I will also become Menjiang. I am leaving. I've been delayed for 20 minutes and it's late.
要受惩戒的。今夜哪能再睡？不明的夜里，只有灿灿的星光和不尽的江流，要送我们到新的生命场中做奋斗去。刘伯伯，妹在家吗？我不能见她，祝你们幸福啊。
To be punished. How can we sleep again tonight? In the unknown night, there are only bright stars and endless rivers to send us to struggle in the new field of life. Uncle Lou, is my sister at home? I can't see her. I wish you happiness. To be punished. how can we sleep again tonight? In the unknown night, there are only bright stars and endless rivers to send us to struggle in the new field of life. Uncle Lou, is my sister at home? I can't see her. I wish you happiness. Ah.
青年一阵子极具无伦次的话，音调已不似先前那样柔和了，凄梗的叫人听不出。他也不再顾刘伯伯，将身一跃，跨上马去。马嗅了嗅气，四蹄已经发动。这时
The young man's words were hurried and incoherent for a while, and the tone was no longer as soft as before. It was so sad that no one could hear it. He no longer paid attention to Uncle Lou, jumped up and mounted the horse. The horse sniffed and started to move its hooves. At this time,
那溪流旁肩筐的农妇不知是什么事，还呆呆地立在那里看。但他有新的发现，高呼出哑闷的声音道：“你们看他从楼上下来。”这句话将刘伯伯的痴想与青年坚决的勇气。
The peasant woman with the basket beside the stream didn't know what was going on, and she still stood there blankly watching, but she had a new discovery, and shouted in a hoarse voice, "Look at her coming down from upstairs." This sentence combines Uncle Liu's fantasy and the young man's determined courage.
都震动了。原来一个17、18岁的姑娘拿着一朵玫瑰花从楼上下来，正拉开院外的竹子编成的门。这时青年已经瞧清楚，便觉得身上抖颤的几乎要跌下马来。
They were all shocked. It turned out that a girl of 17 or 18 years old came down from upstairs holding a rose. The bamboo door outside the courtyard is being opened. By this time the young man had seen it clearly, and he felt his body trembling so much that he almost fell off his horse.
看他穿的月白色的衣服，如在月影中一般。他咬了咬牙齿，便在马上脱下草帽，高喊道：“妹，妹，还认得我吗？我走，永远走了。可扶刘伯伯回家去。他不能再说了。”
Look at the moon-white clothes she is wearing, as if she is in the shadow of the moon. He gritted his teeth and took off his straw hat on the horse, shouting, "Sister, sister! Do you still recognize me? I'm leaving, forever. But help Uncle Lou go home." He could say no more.
便拼命地将绿皮的马鞭乱挥，马便放足跑去。他的鞭子向溪旁一挥，竟将一株向日葵的本干折断，碗口大的黄花便连枝掉在溪里去。一阵西风吹得落叶刷刷地响。
Then he waved his green whip wildly, and the horse ran away. With a wave of his whip towards the stream, he broke the stem of a sunflower, and the yellow flower as big as the mouth of a bowl fell into the stream with its branches. Go! A gust of west wind made the fallen leaves rustle,
马尘的烟也没有了，只是那个肩筐的农妇还远远地望去。村后的陵墓满了黑暗的影，修长的石道没有一点的细响。又是一年的同样的秋日，乡村中是一样的忙碌。
Much and smoke is gone, but the peasant woman with the basket is still looking at her from a distance. The mausoleum behind the village is full of dark shadows, and the long stone path makes no sound. It's the same autumn day again, and the countryside is just as busy.
那一天是个沉闷的天，却没有霞光的映耀与夕阳的美丽。村前的溪流也满注了些污秽的水，不似去年那样的清洁。一片片的黑云在空中流动，像要下雨。刘伯伯衔着烟斗。
That day was a dull day, but there was no ray of light or the beauty of the sunset. The stream in front of the village was also full of dirty water and was not as clean as last year. Patches of black clouds were flowing in the sky, as if it was going to rain. Uncle Lou held his pipe in his mouth.
倚在柳树上，望着远远村后的石径上凝思，谁也不晓他想些什么。不过额上已是添上了几叠皱纹。他的女儿脸色也很黄瘦的伏在溪边大石上。
Leaning on the willow tree, looking at the stone path behind the village in the distance and meditating, no one knows what he is thinking. However, there were already a few wrinkles on his forehead. His daughter, who also had a yellow and thin complexion, was lying on the big rock by the stream.
用手把着那颗枯干的向日葵的鱼干，可怜去年此日的鞭痕，遂葬送了这颗迎风含笑、有美丽生命的向日葵。他自夏日害了一场病，往别处去医治了3个月，这时方回到村里。
Holding the remaining stems of the withered sunflower with his hands. Unfortunately, the whip marks on this day last year ruined this sunflower that was smiling in the wind and full of beautiful life. She fell ill in the summer and went elsewhere for treatment for 3 months before returning to the village.
他同他父亲都掉在一个沉闷的渊里，终日里都是静静的，没有一句话。他这时同他父亲本想出来呼吸清新的秋日的空气，哪知到了溪边，却都同失了他们的神智似的。
Both she and her father had fallen into a dreary abyss. It was quiet all day long, without a word. At this time, she and her father wanted to go out and breathe the fresh autumn air, but when they reached the stream, they both seemed to have lost their minds.
那片段的生活的悲痛，却没有一个消息来安慰他们。一样的去年此日，只是少了那个背筐的妇人。刘伯伯的烟斗中没得些微余烬，还只管含在口里，向石径上呆看。
The sorrow of that fragmented life, but no news to comfort them. It's the same day as last year, except that the woman carrying the basket is missing. Uncle Lou didn't get any embers in his pipe, so he just kept it in his mouth and stared at the stone path.
今年战事完了，看军事的报告的确死了万千的人。刘伯伯的女儿若儿无次序的脑中这样想。那干枯将要折倒的向日葵上的鞭痕似乎向他点手。西风吹来，有冷的感觉。
This year, the war is over. Looking at the military report, it is true that he is dead. Thousands of people. Uncle Lou's daughter thought this in her weak and disorderly mind. The whip marks on the withered sunflower seemed to nod to her. The west wind blows, feeling cold.
使他重温到去年此日如梦一般的光景。他想着，不料猛被向日葵上鞭痕所留下的干刺触破他的颤颤的手指。1921年2月，遗音。飞鸽制作飞鸽文学。
It made her relive the dreamlike scene of this day last year. She thought, but unexpectedly, the dry thorns left by the whip marks on the sunflower touched her trembling fingers. February 1921, Legacy. Flying Pigeon production at Flying Pigeon Literature.
远远的一带枫树林子拥抱着一个江边的市镇，这个市镇在左右的乡村中算是一个人口最多、风景最美的地方。镇前便是很弯曲而深入的江湾，湾的北面。
In the distance, a maple forest embraces a riverside town. This town is among the villages on the left and right. It is a place with the largest population and the most beautiful scenery. In front of the town is a very winding and deep river bay. On the north side of the bay,
却有所比较着还整齐而洁净的房子。房子中也有用砖石砌成的2层楼的建筑。正午的日影将楼影斜照在楼前的一片草场上，影子很修长。原来这所建筑
but in comparison, the house is neat and clean. The house also has a 2-story building made of bricks and stones. The shadow of the sun at noon casts the shadow of the building on the grassland in front of the building. The shadow is very slender. It turns out that this building
是镇中公立小学校的校舍。这镇上人很高明，他们寻得这个全镇风景最佳的江边，设立了这所学校。校里的男女儿童约有300人。校舍的西角便是教员住室。
It is the school building of the public primary school in the town. The people in this town are very smart. They found the riverside with the most beautiful scenery in the town and established this school. There are about 300 boys and girls in the school. The west corner of the school building is the teacher's dormitory.
这也是校内特为教员所建筑的预备教员家眷的住处。再往西去，就是些沙上林腹，有些矮树野草，绿茸茸的，一望皆是。这日正是星期的上午，江边的风受了水汽的调和。
This is also built for teachers within the school to prepare residences for teachers' families. Further west, there are some sandy tombs, some short trees and weeds, and green and furry grass everywhere. It was a Sunday morning, and the wind by the river was tempered by the water vapor.
虽是秋末冬初，尚不十分冷冽，有时吹了些树叶落到江波上，便随着微细的波花无踪影地流去。教员住宅靠江的一间屋子里，一个27、28岁的青年。
Although it is late autumn and early winter, it is not very cold yet. Sometimes some leaves are blown and fall on the river waves, and then flow away without a trace along with the tiny ripples. In a room next to the river in the teacher's residence, a young man in his 20s or 80s.
对着许多书籍稿纸坐着发呆。他不是本地人，然而他在这个校里当高等部教员主任已将近3年。自近2年来，连他的母亲、妻子都搬来同住。
Sitting in front of many books and papers, I sat in a daze. He is not a local, but he has been the dean of the higher education department at this school for nearly 3 years. In the past 2 years, even his mother and wife have moved in with him.
他的性格是崇高的小学教员的性格。他虽是不到30岁的青年，然做这等粉笔黑板的生活已经有7年多了。他自从20岁在师范学校毕业以后，为生活问题所逼迫。
His character is that of a noble primary school teacher. Although he is a young man under 30 years old, he has been living a life of chalk and blackboard for more than 7 years. Since he graduated from a normal school at the age of 20, he has been forced by life problems.
便抛弃远大的希望，经营这种生活。他性情缜密而恬钝，独勤于教育事业，终日与那些红甲可爱的儿童为伍的事业是他非常乐意的。他不愿在都市里同一般人乱混。
Then abandon the lofty hopes and live this kind of life. He has a careful and reclusive temperament, and is dedicated to education alone. He was very happy to be surrounded by those rosy-cheeked and adorable children all day long. He doesn't want to hang out with other people in the city.
他觉得他的生活的兴味这样也很满足的。他的学识不坏，就是教授中学校的学生也能胜任。不过他是没有这种机会，他也不找这种机会，他情愿一生都是这样的平淡娴静。
He feels that his life is interesting and very satisfying. His knowledge is not bad, and he is qualified to teach middle school students. However, He does not have such an opportunity, and he does not look for such an opportunity. He would rather stay so plain and quiet all his life.
自然。可是他的境遇现在虽是平淡、娴静、自然，他的心中却终没有平淡、娴静、自然的时候。因为在他20岁以后的生活里，忽然起了一次情海的波纹，这层波纹在他的精神里。
Nature. However, although his situation is now dull, quiet, and natural, there is never a dull, quiet, and natural time in his heart. Because in his life after the age of 20, a ripple of love suddenly appeared. This ripple, in his spirit,
永不能泯去痕迹。他从前是活泼的、愉快的，然而这几年来，他是沉郁的多了。时时若有一个事物聚在他的灵魂里，使他对于无论什么事都发生一种很奇异而不可解的疑问。
The traces can never be erased. He used to be lively and cheerful, but in the past few years, he has become much more depressed. If there is something that occupies his soul at any time, causing him to have a very strange and unsolvable doubt about everything,
因此他的心境越发沉滞了。这日是休假的日子，校里的儿童都已放假回他们快乐的家庭里去，忙碌1星期的那些教员也都各自找着他们的朋友出去闲玩了。
Therefore, his state of mind became more and more sluggish. Today is a day off. The children in the school have all gone back to their happy families. The teachers who have been busy for a week have also found their friends and gone out to play.
他这时候却坐在自己的书室里，对着一层层的书籍出神。原来他为《教育报》做的稿子需3天以内做完，他想做一篇关于性育教育的文章，早已参考了许多书。
At this time, he was sitting in his study room, fascinated by the layers of books. It turned out that the manuscript he wrote for the Education News had to be completed within 3 days. He wanted to write an article about sexual desire education. I have already consulted many books.
立了许多条目。这日用过早饭以后，他母亲和他妻与一个3周岁的小孩都到镇中人家去闲谈去了。他独自坐在这里，想要将他的教育思想趁着这一天的闲工夫。
Many items were made, and after breakfast that day, his mother, his wife, and a 3-year-old child went to other people's houses in the town to chat. He is sitting here alone, wanting to take advantage of this day's free time to put his educational thoughts into.
慢慢地写出。他坐在一把竹椅子上，排好了书籍，铺正了稿纸，方要拿笔来写，但只是觉得身上抖得冷了一阵，觉得从窗隙钻进来的风使他心颤， 头上痛了一会子。
Write slowly. He sat on a bamboo chair, arranged the books, laid out the manuscript paper, and was about to take a pen to write, but he just felt a sudden coldness on his body, and felt that the wind coming in through the window made his heart tremble. My head hurt for a while.
不舒服得很。他不知怎地，把着一支毛笔，只是望着对面绿色刷的壁上挂的5年前自己照的相片发呆。那张相片虽是装在镜框里，然5年以来，片上的颜色已有些陈旧。
Very uncomfortable. For some reason, he was holding a writing brush and just stared at the photo of himself taken 5 years ago hanging on the green wall opposite in a daze. Although the photo was mounted in a frame, the color on the photo has become a bit dated over the past 5 years.
隔了一层细尘，更显得有些模糊，就像他的生活一年比一年暗淡一样。他看着相片框子上嵌镶的花纹，弯曲而美丽，像那一点曲线里。
Separated by a layer of fine dust, it looked a little blurry, just like his life was getting darker every year. He looked at the pattern inlaid on the frame of the picture, which was curved and beautiful, like in that little curve.
也藏着一个生命的小影在里面流转一般。他想，这必是一个有名的美术家的作品。他不禁微微地叹了一口气，自己寻思，这就是一个人的精神剩余吗？想到这里
There is also a small shadow of life hidden in it. He thought this must be the work of a famous artist. He couldn't help but sigh slightly and thought to himself, is this a person's spiritual remainder? Thinking of this,
低头看看一张草稿上，仍然没写上一个字，便很勉强地拔出笔，向纸上很陡战地写了幸运2个字。哪知这支笔尖早是吐了半截，写得认不清楚。他很愁闷地将笔往案上一掷。
I looked down at a piece of draft, but there was still no word written on it, so I reluctantly pulled out the pen and wrote the word sexual desire on the paper with great trembling. Unexpectedly, the nib of this pen was already half bald, making it difficult to read clearly. He threw the pen on the case sadly.
心里宛同有块石头塞住了似的，渐渐地立起来，抽开书案下层的抽屉，捡了半天，方捡出一支笔来，又一番捡，他不禁很惊讶，惶急地说出一个“可”字来，这个音由他喉中探出。
There was a stone in my heart, and gradually stood up, opened the drawer on the lower layer of the book, picked it up for a long time, and picked up a pen for a long time. Ahem. The sound came out of his throat as he sighed.
然而非常急促而沉重。他静默无语，拿出一张硬纸红字的美丽信片，用尽目力去注视，始终一点声浪没有，只是2个云雀 在窗外的细竹枝子上一地一声的交鸣。
Yet very rapid and heavy. He was silent, took out a beautiful card with red letters on the cardboard, and looked at it with all his eyes. There was no sound at all in the room, just two skylarks chirping on the thin bamboo branches outside the window.
信片虽是保存得非常严密，而红色的字迹经过几年的空气侵蚀，也将颜色褪得淡了许多。他这时无意中将这个信片找出，便使他靠在椅背上，几乎全身都没得丝毫气力。
Although the postcard was very carefully preserved, the red writing has faded a lot after several years of air erosion. At this time, he accidentally found the postcard and leaned back on the chair, almost losing all strength in his body.
原来那张信片里藏了许多热烈而沉挚的泪，爱和不幸的命运，以及生活的幻影。也就是他的情海中的一层波纹，是他永不能忘记的波纹。他呆呆地看了一会。
It turned out that there were many warm and sincere tears, love and unfortunate fate hidden in that postcard, as well as the phantom of life. It was a ripple in his sea of love, a ripple he could never forget. He looked at it blankly for a while.
很没气力地将那信片轻轻放在岸上，自己想到，这是他最后的遗音了，这是他最后的遗音了，却再也不能够想起别的事情来。无意中将刚由抽屉里找出来的那支新笔。
She weakly put the postcard on the case and thought to herself, "This is her last message. These are her last words. But I can no longer think of anything else. I accidentally picked up the new pen I just found out from the drawer."
掉在地上，他便俯着身子拾起来，一抬头含着泪痕的眼光，与那壁上挂的相片接触着，猛然又想起是5年半的光阴了。那时这张相片比较现在的面色却不同得多。
When it fell on the ground, he leaned over to pick it up. When he raised his head, his tear-stained eyes came into contact with the photo hanging on the wall, and he suddenly remembered that it was 5.5 years ago. In this photo at that time, the complexion was much different compared to the face now.
宛同他这纸最后遗音是当年一样鲜明的颜色，少年的容貌都一年一年的暗淡消失了，而生活的兴味也一年一年的减去了。环境的变迁真快啊！他想到这里。
Wantong's last words on her paper are the same bright color as before, and the young man's appearance has faded and disappeared year by year. And the interest in life is diminishing year by year. The environment changes so quickly. He thought of this.
那很细琐、很杂乱的前世，都如电影片子， 一次一次地在他的脑子中映现而颤动了。他想，他自从在学校毕业的那1个月里，他父亲死在银行的会计室中。
The very detailed and complicated past events were like movie clips, replaying in his mind again and again and trembling. He thought, since his father died in the accounting office of the bank in the month after he graduated from school.
他本来可以再升学的，但那是不能有希望了。他父亲死了，家中又没有什么收入，他有个侄子，有40多岁、身体很不康健的母亲，不能不离去学校，谋一家人的生计。
He could have gone on to higher education, but there was no hope then. His father is dead and the family has little income. He has a sister and a mother who is in her 40s and is very unhealthy. She has to leave school to make a living for the family.
于是他便由一个朋友的介绍，往一个极小的外县的农村里，充当一所女子高等小学校的历史国文教员。那时他刚21岁，然而他在学校里成绩既好，性情又和蔼。
So he was introduced by a friend to work as a history and Chinese language teacher at a girls' primary school in a very small rural area in a foreign county. He was just 21 years old at that time. However, he had good grades in school and had a kind temperament.
所以人家很信任他。他记得第一次由家里去到这个远地的农村学校的时候，他母亲和侄子在门首送他。他母亲逆着很劲烈的北风，咳嗽了几声，极致咳完。
So people trust him very much. He remembered that the first time he went to this remote rural school from home, his mother and sister saw him off at the door. His mother, against the strong north wind, coughed several times, and when she finished coughing,
眼中早含着满眶的泪痕。他侄子替他将外衣披好，一段一续的似乎说：“兄弟，你现在要出去做事了，第一次的做事，身体也不要劳着，免得妈老远的纪念着。”这几句话没说完。
his eyes were filled with tears. His sister put his coat on for him and seemed to say intermittently, "Brother, you are going out to work now. It is your first time to work, and your body is not tiring. In case." Mom, I remember it from afar. Before I finished these words,
一阵风就将他侄子的话咽回去了。他想到这种念头，记起他自小时最亲爱的侄子来。可是他侄子已经同她的丈夫到北方去了，远隔着几千里的路程呢。
a gust of wind swallowed back his sister's words. He thought of this thought and remembered his dearest sister since he was a child, but his sister had already gone to the north with her husband, thousands of miles away.
他在那个极僻陋的农村子里， 做1个月20元的教员，却平平地过了1个年头。第2年，他子子同他母亲也因为家中生活困难，便也搬来同他住在一处。
He worked as a teacher for 20 yuan a month in that extremely remote rural village, but he lived a normal life for a year. The next year, his sister and his mother also moved in with him because of difficulties in living at home. Live in one place.
后来他子子就同他的一个同事结了婚。他想了这一些往事，便用手点着那张信片的拆角，心里很酸楚地想：我若不遇见你，我的精神当没有一点翻腾。可是啊。
Later his sister married one of his colleagues. After thinking about these past events, he tapped the corner of the postcard with his hand, thinking sadly in his heart, if I hadn't met you, my spirit would not be surging at all, but awe.
你是一个乡村中天真活泼而自然的女孩子，设使我不到那里去，你也可以很安贴地做一个无知无识的乡村妇人。到现在，在你的平静家庭里安享点幸福。
You are an innocent, lively, and natural girl in the countryside. If I don't go there, you can still be an ignorant country woman. Until now, you can enjoy a little peace in your peaceful family. Happiness.
不比这飘零受苦好得多吗？他回忆在那个农村里与他无意中相遇见的时候，是在他到那里第2年的2月里。有一天下午，校中的女学生都散学走了。他拿了一本诗集。
Isn't it much better than living in pain? He recalled that he accidentally met her in that rural village in February of the 2nd year after he arrived there. One afternoon, all the female students in the school had left school. He took this collection of poems.
穿了短衣，出了村子，就在河岸上一个桃树林子里，坐在草地上读去。那时桃花已经有一半是开好了，红色和白色相间，烂漫的实在可爱。他简看书籍，精神极愉快，头发蓬着。
After putting on short clothes, I left the village and sat on the grass in a peach grove on the river bank to read. At that time, half of the peach blossoms were already blooming, red and white, so bright and lovely. He was looking at the book, in great spirits, with his hair disheveled.
从花影中现出了他的面貌。河滩里一群男女孩子在那里游戏，他从山里采了一筐子茶芽，同他的女伴沿着河岸走来，恰巧一个顽皮的孩子扬起一把沙泥向空中撒去。
His face emerged from the shadow of the flowers. A group of boys and girls were playing on the river beach. She picked a basket of tea buds from the mountains and walked along the river bank with her female companion. It happened that a naughty child raised a handful of sand and mud and threw it into the air.
于是 他的眼眯了，一失足跌在岸旁，触在块石头上，便晕去了。小孩子吓得跑了，他的女伴都是16、17岁的女子，也急得在那里一起乱喊，有的哭了。他看见了。
So her eyes narrowed, she lost her footing and fell to the shore, hit a stone, and fainted. The child was so frightened that she ran away. Her female companions, both 16 or 17 years old, were also so anxious that they all shouted together, and some even cried. He saw it.
便走去帮着他们将他用人工救急法治醒了。不多时，他的寡母也来了，便扶他回去，向着他道谢了好多话，请明天到他家里去。他这时第一次认识他。
Then he went to help them wake her up with artificial first aid. Not long after, her widowed mother came and helped her back. She thanked him many times and asked him to come to her home tomorrow. He met her for the first time now.
他是第一次看见她清秀美丽的面庞，神光很安静的眼睛，便给他留下了一个不可洗刷的印象，在他脑子里。他们走了，日影也落到河水的沙底里去了。
This was the first time he saw her delicate and beautiful face and her quiet eyes, which left an indelible impression on him in his mind. They left, and the shadow of the sun fell into the sandy bottom of the river.
他只是看着洒下的碧绿鲜嫩的茶芽凝想。自此以后，他在这个乡村里便得了一种有兴趣而愉快的新生活。她是这乡村中很穷苦的女子，她比他小了4岁，她的家庭。
He just looked at the green and tender tea buds that were scattered and pondered. From then on, he had an interesting and happy new life in this village. She is a very poor woman in this village. She is 4 years younger than him. Her family.
就是他母亲和他是村中人口最少的家庭。她是天然的美丽，天然的聪明，而又有丰厚而缠绵的感情。她的言辞见解，处处都能见出她是天真未凿的女子。
It was her mother and she, the family with the smallest population in the village. She is naturally beautiful, naturally smart, and has rich and lingering emotions. Her words and opinions show that she is an innocent woman.
他每与他做种种谈话，都带了诗人的神思。她实在是自然的好女子。她母亲以诚恳的态度对她，不过她家中非常清苦。他去时只可坐在他那后园里桑树荫下的石头上。
Every conversation she had with him brought out the thoughts of a poet. She was really a natural and good woman. His mother treated him sincerely, but her family was very poor. When he went there, he could only sit on a stone under the shade of the mulberry tree in her back garden.
饮着很苦而颜色极浓的茶。他识的几个字，又加上他的指教，不半年的功夫，他便将他介绍到学校1年级里去读书。但他还是有暇便去采茶、饲蚕、纺织、做针线。
Drinking very bitter and very strong tea. She knew a few words, and with his guidance, within half a year, he introduced her to the first grade of the school. But she still had time to pick tea, feed silkworms, weave, and do needlework.
去补助他家的生活，他每月给他几元钱的补助，但是别人都不知道。他读书的天资，别的女孩子都赶不上，他也非常喜欢。于是1年的光阴，由温和的春日到了年末。
To subsidize her family's living, he gave her a few yuan a month as a subsidy, but no one else knew about it. Her talent for reading is unmatched by other girls, and he likes her very much, so the year goes from gentle spring days to the end of the year.
他的知识已经增加了许多，可是他那烂漫天真的性格却依然如旧。在这1年中，算是他与他最安慰而快乐的1年了。他在这一天一天的光阴里过去。
Her intelligence has increased a lot, but her innocent and naive character remains the same. This year was the most comforting and happiest year for her and him. He passes by day.
他只觉得似乎是在甜蜜与醇醪中度过，因为他们的灵魂早已做了精神的接触，便于无意中想得了恋爱的滋味，这是他到了现在方悟过来。那时只知是彼此的精神情绪。
He just felt like he was spending his time in sweetness and mellowness. Because their souls had already made spiritual contact, they could enjoy the taste of love unintentionally. This was only now that he realized it. At that time, I only knew that it was each other's mental emotions.
都十分安慰罢了。他回想了半天，想到那时他与她游泳于自然的爱河中的愉快，到如今还像就在昨天或是刚才的事一般。但他又记起由喜剧而变为悲剧的情况。
It's all very comforting. He thought about it for a long time, thinking of the joy he had with her swimming in the natural love river at that time. It still seems like it was yesterday, or just now. But he remembered the situation that turned from comedy to tragedy.
悲剧开幕的原因即在他母亲的死。他母亲自青年便受了情绪与生活的失调和压迫，早种下了肺结核的病根。这几年来，虽然看着他自己的爱女渐渐大了，长得美丽。
The tragedy begins with the death of her mother. Her mother has suffered from emotional and life disorders and oppression since she was young, and the root cause of tuberculosis was already planted. In the past few years, although she has watched her beloved daughter grow older and more beautiful,
又有志时，又因得了他的助力，心上也比从前放宽了些。但是他的身体究竟枯弱极了，便在他女儿入校读书的第2年4月里死去了。他家里没有余钱，更没个人帮助。
I have wisdom, and because of his help, I feel more relaxed than before. But her body was so weak that she died in April of the 2nd year after her daughter entered school. Her family has no money left, and no personal help.
他哭得几次晕昏过去，幸得他侄子同他去劝慰，他省了1个月的薪水，方得将他母亲殓葬。然而她成了孤女了。他的侄子又恰在这时随他的子夫到别处去了。
She cried until she fainted several times. Fortunately, his sister went with him to comfort her, and he saved a month's salary so that he could bury her mother. But she became an orphan. His sister happened to go elsewhere with his brother-in-law at this time.
他与他母亲商好，便将他搬到他家去住着。他终日里常是哭泣，他母亲也非常的可怜他，究竟是有些防闲的意思。他觉得了，她又不是蠢笨的女子，自然也明白。
He made an agreement with his mother and moved her to live with him. She cried all day long, and his mother felt very sorry for her. After all, she was trying to prevent suspicion. He felt it. She was not a stupid woman, so he naturally understood.
更是终日自觉不安，所以他们自从经过这番变动以后，除了在学校以外，形式上更是疏远，而他们的精神上却彼此都添了一层说不出的奇异而恐惧的感觉。
They feel uneasy all day long, so since they went through this change, except in school, they have become even more alienated in form, but mentally, they have added an indescribable strange and frightening feeling to each other.
这个乡村的人是非常尊重就道德的，虽有女子学校，也是不得已方请了几个男教员。他是很纯洁而诚笃的，所以自到这里，无论是农夫啊，私塾的老学究啊，
People in this village respect the old morals very much. Although there is a school for girls, they have to hire a few male teachers as a last resort. He is very pure and honest, so since he came here, whether he was a farmer or an old scholar in a private school,
对于他没有什么恶意。但自从他将他介绍到女校里去念书，有些人便不以为然，不过还没有公然的反对。自他母亲死后，经此一番变动，村子里便造出许多的谣言来。
no ill will towards him. But since he introduced her to study in a girls' school, some people have disapproved of it, but there has been no overt opposition. Since her mother's death, after the changes, many rumors have been created in the village.
说他2个人，尤其以乡村妇女为甚。 他们都向他的母亲乱说，他母亲更是着急。那时女学生也不大去听他的教授了，于是村中的校董便着急起来，直接将他的职务辞掉。
Talk about two people, especially rural women. They all talked nonsense to his mother, who was even more anxious. At that time, female students rarely listened to his professors, so the school director in the village became anxious and directly resigned from his post.
他虽不能继续在这个村子生活，但他却也不以为意，商同母亲愿同他一同回到别地方去谋生活去。不料他话还没说完，他母亲便给他几句极坚决的话道：“你自幼时。”
He could no longer continue to live in this village. But he didn't take it seriously. Shang Tong's mother was willing to go back to other places with her to make a living. Unexpectedly, before he could finish his words, his mother gave him a few firm words. Since you were a child, you have been.
你父亲便已为你订过婚的，现在你为他竟然丢了职务也好，我就趁此机会去回家去与你完婚，再打算法子。你不必有什么思想。这突如其来的打击。
Your father was already engaged to you, and now you have lost your job because of her. So good. I will take this opportunity to go home and marry you, and then plan a way. You don't have to think about it. This sudden blow.
他与他生命之花的打击使他昏了半天。原来他在高小学校的时候，他的父母便看好一个亲戚的姑娘，就暗地里将婚定妥。因他素来主张婚姻自由，所以直至他父亲死后。
The blow between him and her flower of life made him unconscious for a long time. It turned out that when he was in high school, his parents had taken a fancy to a girl who was a relative and secretly arranged their marriage. Because he had always advocated freedom of marriage, until his father's death.
他当了教员，他母亲才将这个消息说与他知道。他这时方明白，他母亲虽是爱惜他，却防嫌他的原因。他这时看见婚书聘里摆满了一桌子，他母亲给他的证明。
He became a teacher, and his mother told him the news. Only then did he understand the reason why his mother cherished her but was wary of her. Then he saw the marriage certificate and betrothal gift spread all over the table, the certificates his mother gave him.
他心里直觉得一口口的凉气渗透了肺腑。可是他不能舍弃了他母亲，便不能毁了这个婚约。他觉着这时什么思想也没有，只是身子摇摇不定，手足都没点气力。
He felt a chill in his heart, penetrating into his heart, but he couldn't abandon his mother, and he couldn't break this engagement. He felt that he had no thoughts at this time, but his body was shaky and his limbs had no strength at all.
后来他进来了， 看明白了，他与他母亲的情形都在他聪明而有定力的眼光里。他乍一见时，有一叠泪波在眼里做了一个红晕，即时便现出满脸的笑容。
Later she came in and saw clearly that the situation between him and his mother was reflected in her smart and determined eyes. When she first saw her, there was a pile of tears and a blush in her eyes, with a big smile on his face.
和他母亲看戒指问名字，还忙着给他贺喜，他也不明白他是什么意思，便很悲酸而站立地倒在床上。这一下午，他这个小小家庭里异常清寂，他在屋子里写了半天的信件。
He looked at the ring with his mother, asked her name, and was busy congratulating him. He didn't understand what she meant, so he fell on the bed sadly and tremblingly. This afternoon, his small family was extremely quiet. She spent a long time writing letters in the room.
晚饭后，便亲往邮局去了。他呢，痴痴地趁着月明下闲的残光，披件袈裟，不出村子，到树林子里依着树细细地寻思。但是他的寻思很杂乱，不晓得怎样方好。末后，他也来了。
After dinner, I went to the post office in person. As for him, he took advantage of the remaining light of the last moon, put on a jacket, walked out of the village, went to the woods, leaned against the trees, and thought carefully. But his thoughts were very complicated and he didn't know what to do. At the end, she also came.
星光暗淡下，嗅着林中野蔷薇的香味与自然的夜气，两个人互握着手立着，总觉得彼此的手指都是有同速率的颤动，而个人手腕上脉搏跳得也越发急促。
Under the dim starlight, smelling the fragrance of wild roses in the forest and the natural night air, the two of them stood holding each other's hands. They always felt that each other's fingers were trembling at the same rate, and the pulses on each wrist were beating faster and faster. Rapid.
他们这时却不能说一句什么话，也不知是酸是苦，觉得前途有一重黑而深负的幕将要落下来了。他们这样悲凄的静默，约有40多分钟的功夫。
But they couldn't say a word at this time, and they didn't know whether it was bitter or bitter. They felt that a dark and deep curtain was about to fall on their future. They remained in mournful silence for more than 40 minutes.
后来还是他用极其咽的音说出了一种忍心而坚决的话，这话他现在回思，像当时他在耳边梳着双髻呜咽的在他肩头上说的一般清楚。可是他这时已没有勇力再去追想。
Later, it was she who spoke a kind of forbearing and resolute words in a very plaintive voice. When he thought about these words now, it was as clear as the words she said on his shoulder with her bun next to her ear and her sobs. But he no longer had the courage to think about it any more.
但记得他幕后说的几句话是：不能在你家了，我要赴都会里谋生活去，这村子的人都拿我无耻。那封信是寄予我一个表子的，他是在那边当保姆教员，但是我永不订婚。
But I remember the last few words she said were, I can't stay in your house anymore. I want to go to the city to make a living. People in this village will take advantage of me. Shameless. That letter. It's sent to a cousin of mine, who works as a nanny teacher there. But I'm not engaged.
也不愿你还记。他记得说到这里，两个人便一起晕倒在草地上了。以后的事，他也不愿想了。这是明白的事，他径自独身走了。他也做了恋爱的牺牲者了，结过婚了。
Nor. I hope you will remember it. He remembered that when he said this, the two of them fainted on the grass. He didn't want to think about what would happen in the future. It was obvious that she actually left alone. He also fell in love. A victim. Married.
他这位用红丝既定的妻，也是高等女学校毕过业的学生，性情才貌都很与他相配。若是他未曾经过那番情海的波纹，也没有什么。但是他自此以后，虽他的妻对他
His wife, who is bound in red silk, is also a graduate of a high school for girls, and her temperament, talent, and appearance are very suitable for him. If he had never experienced the ripples of the sea of love, it would be nothing. But from then on, although she, his wife, treated him
有极美满的爱情，他终是觉得心里有个东西成日里刺着作疼。一年一年的过去了，他起初和他通过几次信，可是他来信总是些泛泛的平常话，对于过去的事迹。
Although he had a very happy love, he finally felt that there was something stabbing and hurting in his heart all day long. Year after year passed. He wrote to her several times at first, but her letters always contained general words about past deeds.
却一句也不提及了。后来他充当了江边市镇学校的主任教员，他便寄这一张最后的遗音与他，说他竟在某公司里充当打字生，但不知是哪个公司。
But not a word was mentioned. Later, he became the head teacher of Jiangbian Town School, so she sent him this last note, saying that she was working as a typist in a certain company, but she didn't know which company.
后面他说，他现在立誓不与男子通信，情愿一辈子过这种流浪生涯，并他也往后不再通信，即去见他，他也绝不愿再见他。他说他的小影早已嵌住在他的心头。
Later she said that she had sworn not to correspond with the man now, and would rather live this wandering life for the rest of her life, and that he would never correspond with him again. Even if she went to see her, she would never see him again. She said that his little shadow had already been embedded in him. In her heart.
从此就算永没有关系。他这封信连个地址也不写上，他一连写了几封沉痛的信，往他的旧地址寄去，却是没见一个回字。他为他到过那个都会2次。
From now on it will never matter. She didn't even include an address in this letter. He wrote several heartbreaking letters in succession, but sent them to her old address but received no reply. He had been to that city twice for her.
却没找到一点关于他的消息。过了2、3年，他有了个小孩子，生活上不能抛了职务，家庭上也多了牵累。他与他妻子的爱情在长日融洽里。
But couldn't find any information about her. 2 or 3 years later, he had a child. He had to give up his job and life, and his family was also more involved. The love between him and his wife continued to be harmonious for a long time.
不知不觉的比初婚时增加了好些，但他心头上的痛苦终难除去。他这半日的回思，使他少年的热泪湿透了那张最后的信片，泪痕渗在红钢笔写出的字迹上。
Unknowingly, the number had increased compared to when he first got married, but the pain in his heart could never be eradicated. His half-day recollection caused his young tears to soak through the thickest postcard, and the tear stains soaked into the handwriting written with the red pen.
晚同血一般的鲜艳。2点钟、3点钟、4点钟也快过了，他坐在竹椅上，也不起立，也不动作。草稿上还只是有很草率而不清楚的2个姓喻的大字。日影渐渐落下去了。
As bright as blood. It was almost 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and 4 o'clock. He was sitting on a bamboo chair, neither standing up nor moving. There were only 2 big characters for sexual desire written very carelessly and unclearly on the draft. The shadow of the sun gradually sets.
风声渐渐息了，一对焦明的云雀也拍着翅儿回他们的窠巢去了。但他这个伤心梦影却永没有醒回的一日。院子的外门响了，他的妻穿了一身极雅淡的衣裙。
The sound of the wind gradually subsided, and a pair of chirping skylarks flapped their wings and returned to their nests. But he, this sad dream figure, never woke up. The outer door of the courtyard rang. His wife was wearing a very elegant and light dress.
抱着3岁的孩子，孩子手里弄着一只白菊花，袅娜地从枯尽叶子的藤萝架下走进来。他们进屋来了。那小孩子呀道：“爸爸，爸爸，一朵花呢？”说着，便将鲜嫩的小手向空中一扑。
Holding a 3-year-old child in his arms, the child walked gracefully from under the wisteria trellis with withered leaves, holding a white chrysanthemum in his hand. They came into the house. The little child babbled, "Dad, Dad, there's a flower." As he spoke, he threw his fresh little hands into the air.
将花丢在他的膝上，他这才醒悟过来，将那封最后的遗音往抽屉中一丢，猛回头，却见他妻看了看草稿上“幸运”二字，朝着他从微红的腮窝里现出了一点微微的笑容。
Throw the flowers into his lap. He then came to his senses, threw the last note in the letter into the drawer, turned around, and saw his wife looking at the word sexuality on the draft and looking towards him from the reddish cheeks. Gave a slight smile.
1921年3月，春雨之夜，飞鸽制作按飞鸽文学。黄昏过了，阴沉沉的黑幕罩住了大地，虽有清朗月光，却被一层层灰云遮住，更显得这是一个幽沉、静美、萧条的春夜。
March 1921, Spring Rain Night. Flying Pigeon production at Flying Pigeon Literature. Dusk has passed, and a gloomy black curtain has covered the earth. Although there was clear moonlight, it was obscured by layers of gray clouds, making it appear that it was a gloomy, quiet, and depressed spring night.
灯影被窗隙的微风拂着，只在白纱围上一来一往的颤动。我正自拿了一本现代的英文新诗集，包桃林所作的一首，名《悲哀之夜》，里面有几句是
The shadow of the lamp was blown by the breeze through the window, only trembling back and forth on the white gauze curtain. I was picking up a collection of modern English poems, a poem by Bao Tao Lin called Sorrowful Night. There are a few sentences in it.
我听见落叶松林中如流水的声相近，发出了耸动啊、静止啊和那种摇音。在寂寞的夜里，未眠之前，我尽能听闻。我口里重复念着，正在咀嚼那寂寞之夜，未眠之前。
I heard the sound of running water in the larch forest, making a trembling, stilling, and shaking sound. In the lonely night, before falling asleep, I listen as much as I can. I repeated it in my mouth, chewing on the words "lonely night" before falling asleep.
我竟能听闻几个字，仿佛这种文字里有浓厚味道一般。我便想寂寞之夜呀，今夕。想到这里，不觉得便把很厚的一册洋装书吊在床上，原来有一种细微凄凉的声音。
The words, "I can hear as much as I can," seem to have a strong flavor in these words. I thought about the lonely night, tonight. Thinking of this, I dropped a thick dress book on the bed. It turned out that there is a small and sad sound.
冲破了这个静静。那种声音打在窗纸上，留在树叶上，点滴在门外的菜畦边软而轻松的土壤上，都似奏着又静又轻妙的音乐，一声一声打着人们的心弦。
This tranquility was broken. That kind of sound hits the window paper, flows on the leaves, and drops on the soft and relaxed soil beside the vegetable patch outside the door. They all seem to be playing quiet and gentle music, hitting people's heartstrings one after another.
起初还滴答滴答的散落作响，后来被阴夜的东风吹着，一阵阵嘻嘻萧萧，却完成了这个寂寞的春雨之夜。有这等轻灵凄烟的雨声，似是冲跑了寂寞。
At first it was still ticking and scattered, but later it was urged by the east wind in the dark night, and bursts of pitter-patter completed this lonely spring rain night. There is such a light and mournful sound of rain, which seems to wash away the loneliness.
然而使人听了，比静守着寂寞还要恐怖，还要感动。和美的声音容易触发人的深感，而幽凄的音响却难给人以娱乐的同情。幽凄的音啊，你怎么这样容易使人回思？
However, listening to it is more terrifying and touching than staying silent and lonely. A harmonious sound can easily trigger people's deep feelings, but a sad sound can hardly give people happy sympathy. What a sad sound! Why do you make people think so easily?
使人想到那些微小的事实上去，这些事实是深深地埋在人们的心深处，永远用血花包住没有凋萎的日期，易得了幽凄音响的滋润，便开了蓓蕾，放出悱恻醉人的芳香。
Remind people of those tiny facts. These facts are buried deeply in people's hearts. They will always and forever be wrapped with blood flowers that have not withered. Once they are nourished by the melancholy sound, they will bloom and release the intoxicating fragrance.
不过这等思想的芳香，却使人如嚼坚果，从心色中得出甘苦的味道。灯影依旧摇着，白纱的轻微沙沙响动。一阵阵细雨声，使我重回到几年前的梦境，8年前的梦境。
However, the fragrance of these thoughts makes people feel like chewing remonstrance fruit, getting a sweet and bitter taste from the pungent. The lamp's shadow is still swaying, and the light curtain of white gauze rustles. The sound of drizzle brought me back to the dream I had a few years ago. The dream 8 years ago.
或是虚伪的梦境，脑中的幻想重重演出，荒野沉黑，轮声激动，细碎的雨点打在玻璃窗上做清脆的音响。哦，又是一个别样的春雨之夜。那夜是3月末的一夜，在一辆火车里。
Or is it a false dream? The fantasies in my mind are staged repeatedly. The wilderness is dark. The sound of wheels is exciting. The fine raindrops hit the glass window and make a crisp sound. Oh, it's another different kind of spring rain night. That night was at the end of March, in a train.
惨惨乱摇的灯光映着这一连10数辆的客车在荒郊中慢慢行去。那时不过晚上10点多钟，虽是春夜，却因在日落前下了一场雨，料峭东风，吹得车中人都打几个寒噤。
The miserably swaying lights reflected a dozen passenger buses in a row, slowly traveling in the wilderness. It was only around 10 o'clock in the evening. Although it was a spring night, it rained before sunset and the strong east wind made everyone in the car shiver.
车中的旅客也不多了，我那时靠在窗下，闭着眼睛，只是恨这天火车的轮机转动得太慢。雨中的汽笛声也非常沉闷，像哑了喉咙的老人拼命呼喊一样。
There were not many passengers in the car either. I was leaning under the window with my eyes closed, and I just hated that the engine of the train was turning too slowly that day. The sound of the whistle and the rain was also very dull, like an old man with a hoarse throat shouting desperately.
越听得出车外雨声的轻响，使人虽觉得精神沉闷，却只愿车开得慢，没有一点反感因为雨的来临。我正想入睡，只是睡不着，忽有种亲切声音由对面传来道：“哦，你起来。”
The clearer sound of rain outside the car can be heard. Although people feel mentally depressed, they only complain about the slow driving of the car, not any resentment because of the coming rain. I was about to fall asleep, but couldn't. Suddenly, a kind voice came from the other side. Oh, get up.
起来啊，看看有星星在天上了。我不自主地睁眼向对面望去，原来是2个旅行的女子，一个大一些的，一身淡素，一看便知是个在中学的女学生。
Get up. Look at the stars in the sky. I involuntarily opened my eyes and looked across. It turned out to be 2 women traveling. One was older and dressed plainly. At a glance, I knew she was a female student in middle school.
那个小姑娘也不过13、14岁，梳着2个辫子，右手持着一张时下流行的画报，左手却垫着腮夹，抚在那个女学生的身上。她肩窝一起一伏的，像在那里哭泣。那个大几岁的
The little girl was only 13 or 14 years old, with 2 pigtails. She held a popular illustrated magazine in her right hand, and her left hand was resting her cheek, leaning on the female student. Her shoulders were rising and falling as if she were crying. The one who is a few years older.
聪慧的面目上也带着凄惶的样子。 手里拿着没有织成的墨绿色绒织物，一边用手抚着小姑娘的柔发道：“妹妹，你不听见雨声小些了吗？今晚上待一会星光有了，明日啊。”
There is also a look of panic on his smart face. Holding an unwoven dark green velvet fabric in his hand, he stroked the little girl's soft hair with his hand and said, "Sister, don't you hear the sound of the rain getting quieter? Tonight, stay for a while, there is starlight. Tomorrow."
我们就躺在母亲的床上，你忘了吗？母亲叫你画的那张水彩画，我和你钉在母亲的镜台上面。哎，你笑了吗？那位小姑娘果然站起来，拭了拭泪痕，两只明黑的大眼望着子子。
We were lying on Mother's bed. Did you forget it? The watercolor painting that your mother asked you to paint, you and I nailed it to my mother's mirror. Well, did you laugh? As expected, the little girl stood up and wiped away her tears, looking at her sister with her big black eyes.
一会隔着车上的玻璃窗子，听听外面的雨声，便又似有什么欢喜的大事一般，两只手搭在他子子肩上，有自然的笑容。但是那位大几岁的女学生
After a while, she listened to the sound of rain outside through the glass window of the car, and it seemed as if there was some happy event. She put her hands on her sister's shoulders and smiled naturally. But the female student, who is a few years older,
浅灰色的衣襟前却已润湿了一大片。他只是呆望着摇动的灯光，弯弯的眉很时而蹙起，时而放开，眼睛里一片红晕。一会儿抚着胸口，装作咳嗽，像怕他妹妹知道。
The front of the light gray clothes has been wetted a large area. She just stared blankly at the swaying light, her curved eyebrows sometimes frowning, sometimes letting go, her eyes flushed. For a while, she touched her chest and pretended to cough, as if she was afraid that her sister would know.
一会儿强拉着小姑娘的手，柔和的、亲爱的和她低声轻谈。雨声只是零零的不住。我看他们那样天真，忘了车轮转动的快慢，心头上有一种纯洁的感动。
After a while, he took the little girl's hand and talked to her softly and lovingly. The sound of rain is just sporadic. I saw them so innocent, forgetting the speed of the wheels turning, and I felt a pure touch in my heart.
至于他们个人为什么不高兴，为什么烦恼，只有轻妙的雨声能知道吧。雨声没停，车轮却转得快了。到了最后一站，我们便冒着雨，携着行李下了车。
As for why each of them is unhappy or troubled, only the gentle sound of rain can tell, right? The sound of rain didn't stop, but the wheels turned faster. At the last stop, we braved the rain and got off the bus with our luggage.
个人都带着冷缩疲倦的神情。这个站是个乡村商业的市镇，除了几十家工厂和铺店外，却没有什么人家。道路上石子沙土被雨水交合在一起，又没有什么车辆，委实难行。
Everyone looked cold and tired. This station is a rural commercial town. Apart from dozens of factories and shops, there are not many homes. The gravel and sand on the road were glued together by the rain, and there were no vehicles, making it difficult to walk.
我们这时指望有个屋子休憩，因为那时已经半夜，一日的旅行，加上春雨中的苦闷，却是疲劳不堪。于是我们这一个客车上的同行人便被一家站房邀去。
We just wanted a room to rest at this time, because it was almost midnight, and we were really exhausted from the day's travel and the depression in the spring rain. So we, a fellow traveler on the bus, were invited to a hotel.
他们有些人扛着行李急急地走去，我只是缓步寻思。半夜的冷风携着雨丝从鞋面里往人脸上打来。我在前面时时回头望那两位姑娘还在后边。
Some of them were carrying their luggage and walking in a hurry, while I just slowly thought about it. The cold wind in the middle of the night carries the raindrops and hits people's faces from the slope. I kept looking back at the two girls from the front, who were still behind me.
小几岁的仅仅倚在子子身侧，他子子携着一个旅行用的皮囊，举起迟缓无力的脚步，紧蹙双眉，随着我们走来。这时去站不远，电灯光还可照见。站里的房子很多。
The one who was a few years younger leaned closely against her sister. Her sister was holding a leather bag for traveling, raised her slow and weak steps, and followed us with her eyebrows furrowed. It was not far from the station at this time, and the electric light could still illuminate it. There are many houses in the stack.
我便同好多做工的人住在一间大屋子里。12点了，1点了，雨声渐渐停止，唯有门前大树叶子上面的雨水时而流下来的微响可以听得见。我翻来覆去，兀是睡不宁贴。
I lived in a big room with many workers. It was 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, and the sound of rain gradually stopped. Only the sound of rainwater flowing down from time to time on the leaves of the big tree in front of the door could be heard. I tossed and turned and couldn't sleep restlessly.
又觉得身上微微有点痛。屋内还燃着油灯，看看旁边那些工人都呼呼地睡得非常沉酣。雨后的夜里愈显寂寞，窗外水道里听得出流水潺潺的声音。
I felt a slight pain in my body again. Oil lamps were still burning in the house, and the workers nearby were all sleeping soundly. At night after the rain, I feel even more lonely. The sound of gurgling water can be heard in the water channel outside the window.
马棚中的啼声过一会还促他不已，我竭力想睡去，总睡不好。喔喔的鸡声啼了，天快晓了，荒村中的春雨之夜也将终了，方朦胧睡去。第二天仍然阴云密布，没一下阳光。
The sound of hooves in the stable continued for a while. I tried my best to fall asleep, but I couldn't sleep well. The rooster crows, dawn is approaching, and the spring rainy night in the deserted village is coming to an end, before he falls asleep hazily. The next day it was still cloudy and there was no sunshine.
清晨的冷空气使人有新鲜的感觉。我不能再迟延了，顾好马匹，要见着泥泞的道路走去。我正在院子里徘徊着，看竹林里喧哗的绿长叶子，红黄花蕊着了昨夜一场时雨。
The cold air in the morning makes people feel fresh. I could delay no longer, so I hired horses and set off on the muddy road. I was wandering in the yard, looking at the long green leaves and red and yellow stamens of the daylilies in the bamboo fence, caught by a brief rain last night.
非常娇美。忽听的阁室里有女子呻吟的声音，那边是门开了。昨晚在雨中同车的那位大几岁的女学生，微蓬着鬓发立在门口。我看她的眼圈却红肿了。
Very delicate. Suddenly I heard a woman moaning in the next room. The door of the room over there opened, and the female student who was a few years older than the one who was riding with her in the rain last night was standing at the door with her hair slightly disheveled. I saw her eye circles were red and swollen.
她一边望着阴沉的天色，一边带着郁气的口气向室内喊道：“你不要着急，今天到家了，到家了。母亲见我们回去就好了，你不要急得发烧啊。”1921年初春，月影。
While looking at the gloomy sky, she shouted into the room in a breathy tone, "Don't be anxious, we're home today. We're home. Mother will be fine when she sees us go back. Don't be so anxious that you get a fever. Ah, early spring of 1921, moon shadow."
冯慧珍从她的同学家中回来，胸中住了忧郁与惨伤的热血。她记得，出她同学那个竹篱编成的门口的时候，就觉得心口里一阵阵地被哀痛的同情的血丝牛角的作痛。
Feng Huizhen came back from her classmate's home, filled with melancholy and tragic blood. She remembered that when she walked out of the doorway made of bamboo fence by her classmate, she felt that her heart was twisted and painful by the bloody threads of sorrow and sympathy.
当他那位憔悴虚弱的同学用抖颤无力的手指和他握别的时候，他几乎没有立住的勇气，心卜卜地跳， 连句慰藉的话也说不上来。温和木气中吹来的拂面春风。
When her haggard and weak classmate shook hands with her with trembling and weak fingers, she almost didn't have the courage to stand still. Her heart was beating so fast that she couldn't even say a word of comfort. The spring breeze blowing in the gentle evening air.
他却连打了2、3个寒箭。那时太阳还射着微漠的红光，从淡淡的白云中露出，街头柳树嫩绿的枝上已是暗淡模糊，蒙了一层黑影。他那个可怜的同学柔脆的心。
But she shivered for 2 or 3 times in a row. At that time, the sun was still shining a faint red light, peeking out from the pale white clouds. The green branches of the willow trees on the street were already dim and blurred, covered with a layer of black shadow. Her poor classmate, with her fragile heart.
已被悲哀冲破，含着滴不下来的眼泪，和他对立在一棵成荫的杏树下面，呆呆的指向3码外的柳枝里看。自然，他的同学没有再声明看什么的勇气与言语的能力。
Has been broken through by sorrow. With tears that could not fall down, he stood opposite her under a shady almond tree, staring blankly into the willow branches 3 yards away. Of course, her classmates didn't have the courage or the ability to speak again about what they were looking at.
但他是知道的，的确，他想的和那位失望的妇人的心思差不得一些。他却不敢说出，他虽不说出，而恐怖的意识已经在他的脑神经中开始活动起来。他便从悲哀的同情中。
But she knew it. Indeed, her thoughts were quite different from those of the disappointed woman. But she didn't dare to say it. Even though she didn't say it, the consciousness of terror had already started to move in her brain. From her sorrowful sympathy she
加上了一重隐约、细微的恐怖。他不能不走了。他们对立在竹篱外约有10分钟。个人的眼光里表现出特意的、奇亚的注视，个人的脑子里演出些痴念与恐怖的幻影。
Added a layer of vague, subtle terror. She had to leave, and they faced each other outside the bamboo fence for about 10 minutes. Each person's eyes showed a peculiar and astonished gaze, and each person's mind played out some phantoms of obsession and terror.
他们紧紧互握住了手，在静默中自能从精神上互诉出最大量的悲惨的同情。太阳完全落下去了，片片的青云仍然在空中流动。东南山脚上已隆出一个半圆的月儿来。
They held each other's hands tightly, and in silence, they could mentally express to each other the greatest amount of tragic sympathy. The sun has completely set, and pieces of light clouds are still flowing in the sky. On the southeast corner of the mountain, a semicircle moon has appeared.
月光很淡薄的，然而照到远处山凹里的平林、突出的峰顶、农夫的小屋、山腰中的几株马尾松，苍苍茫茫，现出一幅淡远模糊的月夜图。小小的河流从半坡形的曲涧中流过。
The moonlight is very thin, but it shines on the flat forest in the valley in the distance, the prominent peak, the farmer's hut, and a few mason pine trees on the mountainside, showing a faint and blurry picture of a moonlit night. A small river flows through a semi-sloping curved stream.
由10尺内透出的清冷清散的声音，渐远渐细，和坡上的野蔷薇的芬芳的香，一同散布在这个春夜里，来和寂寞的月色作伴。涧旁有条崎岖的小道，便是慧真回校的道路。
The cool and gentle sound coming out of the stone teeth gradually faded away, and together with the fragrant fragrance of the wild roses on the slope, spread in this spring night to keep company with the lonely moonlight. There is a rugged path beside